This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney. Good morning. Around this world and across this nation, the news flow this morning is absolutely extraordinary. Paul Sweeney, where do we begin away from the stock market? The news flow, just something.
Yeah, news flow, Tom. We've got a bunch of geopolitical news. We've got company-specific news. We've got, of course, economic data coming out today. We'll get some more econ data here. And it all comes back to the Fed here, Tom. I mean, we got June 12th. You know, what is this Fed going to do? They're not going to be moving rates, Tom, but are they going to be talking to us about where they want to go in the future? Because, boy, the market went from 6 rate cuts to maybe 1 or
Well,
2.
you see the market now with the VIX 12.75,
Yep.
and the 10-year real yield comes in with a vengeance. Really, I did a lot of technical work on that today, and it's really sitting right on support, maybe a critical point here for the direction of yields. We start strong with Steve Wieting, excuse me, here in a moment. Just a little bit of the news flow that Michael Barr is dealing with. We have the launch of Mr. Musk's rocket. This is a huge engineering deal. It's unmanned, but the big deal is the ginormous rocket goes up, 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 and 2 pieces will be attempted to be retrieved, landing into the ocean, one short and one farther out in the Indian Ocean.
It's busy out there in space these days.
Huge, yeah, it is.
It's busy.
With Boeing the other day, but a huge engineering feat to come somewhere, we believe, in the 8 o'clock hour. Of course, the ECB is well, and at Normandy, on this 80th anniversary of D-Day, the President of the United States is there, and I'm told that King Charles has traveled, even with his illness, from Portsmouth over to Normandy, and we hope to have images of that for you on YouTube as well. We are on YouTube. Subscribe, Bloomberg Podcasts. Search for Bloomberg Podcasts. Exceptionally busy day from the Interactive Broker Studios. Our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. We have little movement in futures. This is following the S&P 500's 25th record close this year. The NASDAQ 100, that climbed 2%. Over to yields. Treasury yields inching higher after falling the previous session, with markets almost fully pricing in 2 Fed rate cuts this year. So we have the 2-year yield 4.73%. That's up 1 basis point. The 10-year yield 4.29%, and that's up 1 basis point. Over to commodities, we have spot gold. That is higher at $2,360 an ounce, and we have Brent crude $78 a barrel, WTI crude $74 a barrel. Few companies making news. Yes, we're starting with NVIDIA. Shares up 1%. Became the first computer chip company to hit the $3 trillion in market capitalization, overtaking Apple in the process of all that. Bloomberg now reporting NVIDIA, Microsoft, Apple now worth more combined than China's stock market. Total market capitalization of about $9.2 trillion. Microsoft will head there next. They're down about 0.1%. The Wall Street Journal says the FTC investigating whether a deal Microsoft struck with AI startup Inflection could have been structured to avoid scrutiny. And then you have the New York Times saying that the DOJ, FTC agreed to divvy up that responsibility for antitrust probes into the roles that were played by Microsoft, NVIDIA, OpenAI in the AI space. A lot of tech news this morning, as you can see. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thank you so much. We note the president about ready to speak in Normandy. We're not going to take the speech, but we'll look for highlights of his comments. Perhaps we'll hear from Emmanuel Macron as well. I'd note the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Austin, of course, with his service to the U.S. Army, in the front row in Normandy. We have in the front row right now, in the shock of these markets, the perfect guest. Stephen Wieting is with Citigroup, and just to say the least, he is steeped in the linkage of our economics to our market. Steve, I can't think of a better person to start with. Is our economics linked to our stock market right now?
Well, it is, but it is out of sync in some ways from the way it has been in the past. We have been, just looking back at the last year and a half, in a period of poor corporate profits, with a few magnificent exceptions. If you take a look at global EPS, ex Mag 7, it was about -7% last year. And we now see it recovering while the labor market, which was torrential in terms of its rebound from the pandemic, is slowing down. So slowing employment and rising corporate profits. That's this moment.
Anna Wong, publishing moments ago on LinkedIn, follows up with her zeitgeist changing birth-death analysis. This is inside baseball, folks. Only Wieting reads this stuff. I don't. But Anna says it's here, and the job revisions will show a more tepid American labor market. Do you agree?
Well, let's just be careful to see the actual data.
Well, she says that. She says that.
Yeah, the levels versus the growth rates. And when you're dealing with 150 million people, what does that necessarily mean? But I think if you take a look at the labor market, and this is all discussed in our Citi Global Wealth midyear outlook report we're releasing today, what you're seeing is a real slowdown in gross hiring. And despite all the the reports on the layoffs, they're not up that much in the aggregate, but a real slowdown in hiring. And you can take a look at the JOLTS report. We've had 4 million fewer unfilled job openings from 12 million, 8 million rounded, right? So this path is coming down. Then there's something else. Now this is really zooming in on the near term, and people get very crazed about this. But we had over 260,000 jobs created in the first quarter of the year. Guess what happens at midyear, right? We have a less seasonal economy, right? We're just thinking about agricultural cycles. Maybe that's the one that people can think about. We don't need to hire and fire everyone because of the time of the year the way we used to. If you take a look at economic surprises, the Citi Economic Surprise Index, you will see that it's stronger in the winter and weaker in the spring and summer. And suddenly everyone is saying this economy was torrentially strong is now in a bust again. And that is not really happening either. But it wouldn't surprise me if job gains are about half the first quarter pace.
Interesting. So, Steve, I'm just, I'm looking at the Wealth Outlook 2024, the mid-year edition for you guys, renewed growth, new challenges, building resistant portfolios. Is a resilient portfolio, can I back away from the Mag 7? Can I try to do some homework here and try to find some value outside of the Magnificent Seven?
I think we just have to take a look. When you're dealing with $3 trillion companies, maybe you can take an individual view.
Okay.
I would just say that for every chip maker there's a customer, and if all of those customers are all spending like mad all at once, we might think about their moats in the future and whether or not they're going to be competing in the same space. And, the good news, and again, the renewed growth part is on profits. I think 10 out of 11 sectors will have EPS gains this year. I think a much larger swath of the world will have EPS gains. And it's not that they're all going to be valued the same. That'll never happen. But the rise in profits is the positive catalyst for more of the world equity market.
All right. Well, how about in fixed income here? I mean, Lisa Mateo is sitting in here at a 2-year Treasury, darn near 5%, no gray hairs. She sleeps fine. What's wrong with buying a 2-year Treasury and just sitting there?
Well, the world doesn't end in 2 years, though. That's part of the issue. So the Treasury market very efficiently is embedding a lot of easing, and the inverted yield curve makes it difficult. But when the Fed says that its long-term normal rate is 2.6%, let's say that they're exaggerating. It isn't going to be that low. What can you do with a 4-year duration? Where will you want to be in 4 years in terms of the interest rate that you're earning? And we think, again, there are big pieces of the bond market that, without a lot of duration risk, can earn you 6%.
What are we going to see in issuance? What are we going to see? I mean, this is a nuts time. Even people that have nailed this, they own NVIDIA to the moon. Agree, there's a resonance, an anxiety to it, a frenzy almost. As Ed Yardeni says, it's the roaring 20s. What are CFOs going to do? I mean, I look at the bond issuance, and this is not Zvi Bodhi up at BU. There's something going on here. Why aren't we seeing normal financing, Steve Wieting?
Well, look, I think I guess that, the thing that's most surprising if we look back now, that in 10 of the last 15 years, we're close to a zero policy rate. And we had this wonderful period in 2021 where Americans could get 2.5% mortgages again, and and say put that on the wall. In the U.S., I think we've had just tremendous amount of refinancing and locking in of really good levels here that make the equity market better. and have limited our need for refinancing. Right. I think, again, it'll pick up. There's some increase in interest costs. And even the U.S. Treasury is better off because of the Fed's tightening. And I know that we've had a couple $100 billion increase in the level of our interest costs. That'll still go up in a bit of time. But they've knocked it out. They've stopped this from being an early 80s kind of environment.
Okay. Steve Wieting, thank you so much. Great initial brief here in an insane news day, to say the least. Let's get right to it. We need a brief with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. Ceremonies for the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings are underway in the north of France. It was June 6, 1944, that the Allied forces landed on the Normandy beach. Along with other world leaders, President Joe Biden is there, and he is greeting veterans. He'll speak soon. Meanwhile, King Charles summarized the British monarchy's regard of the World War II vets as eternal in their debt.
We recall the lesson that comes to us again and again across the decades. Free nations must stand together to oppose tyranny.
It was King Charles's first major address since his cancer diagnosis. Israel is escalating warnings against Hezbollah in Lebanon by threatening it could be forced into a war with the Iran-backed group following increasingly deadly attacks. Hezbollah's rockets and drones have caused significant damage in the past few days. A drone strike on a military facility yesterday wounded 10 Israelis and killed 1 soldier. Senate Republicans have blocked a bill to codify the right to access contraception. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
This is the latest battle over reproductive rights in the U.S. It really wasn't expected to pass, but Senator Jeannie Shaheen says it is another dark day for women.
This country is failing women in New Hampshire and across the country when it comes to protecting our fundamental freedoms.
But Senator Ted Cruz says the bill wasn't really needed.
This is not about protecting this right. It is about politics for the Democrats hiding their own radical view.
And will continue to be a major issue moving toward the election. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Finally, SpaceX is poised to launch its massive Starship rocket on a 4th major test flight this morning. It's part of the company's ongoing journey to ready the system for regular flights to orbit and beyond. Liftoff now has been pushed back to at least 8:50 a.m. Bloomberg will carry it live. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. And for all of us, Michael Barr, thank you for the way you squeeze the news of the morning into 3 minutes. I couldn't do it.
No.
I'd be on the first story. Well,
Tom, I'm fixated on this D-Day, 80 years.
To paint our studio, we have one of the greatest studios in all of radio worldwide. This is the Informed Mateo studio. Thank you, Interactive Brokers, for all that you do for our studio. And we have a wall of monitors up. And as Paul says, it's not only the major networks taking D-Day, every moment of it, including different people that sacrifice, but also Paul, 150 people on a stage at Normandy waiting for the president's comments.
Yeah, exactly. So we heard from the King of England, which was great to see him out in public speaking again.
First time since the Kansas lost weight.
So it's wonderful, and what a wonderful backdrop for him to be.
We are on Apple CarPlay. Good morning on your commute this morning, on Android as well, on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Podcasts. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. We come to you around the world, across this nation, on D-Day.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, little change. Investors await today's jobless claims and tomorrow's U.S. jobs report. Now, this comes a day after private payrolls readings show that hiring at companies grew at the slowest pace since the start of the year. The services sector expanded at the most in 9 months. Now, European stocks rising ahead of the ECB, which is widely expected to cut rates. Their decision comes out in about an hour from now. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield, 4.73%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.29%, and that's up 1 basis point. To earnings we go. We'll start with J.M. Smucker, up 1.5%. Fourth quarter adjusted EPS, that beat estimates. Then we go to Big Lots, down 0.5%. Reported comparable sales first quarter that missed estimates. And finally, yes, people love their leggings. Lululemon shares up 8% after raising its full-year profit outlook. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. At this moment, on the shores of Normandy, above the beaches, the President of the United States, the President of the Republic of France, as well as they listen to anthems. And 10 years on from a 70th anniversary and all sorts of people just becoming, Paul, too old. We are now in our 90s and beyond, pushing 100 years old for those that survive.
Yeah, you think about some of the young men that served there and women that served there. I mean, maybe 17, 18, 19 at the time. So you're right, Tom, the very, very late 90s into the early 100s.
We'll continue to cover the highlights. This is, of course, give you the headlines off Bloomberg News of President Biden's comments. We welcome all of you across the nation. We're trying to focus on the markets as well. First chart I looked at this morning was a 10-year real yield and said, shut up and get Goldberg. Gennady Goldberg joins us right now with TD Securities. I did a fancy 5-trend Wells Wilder trend-based chart of the 10-year real yield, and we are sitting on support. Is that somewhat accurate that we're at a key point for yield?
I think we are, both in real and nominal rates. Nominal rates yesterday actually kind of broke that upward channel that we've been in for most of the year, so I really want to see if that stays. Real rates, you know, you can look at them any which way you like. They are attractive from a longer-term standpoint. You know, the interesting thing for me is they're at the highest levels that they've been in, you know, well over a decade. And a lot of investors are eyeing them and seeing them as a very attractive here.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I type in FedGo into the Bloomberg terminal. I see I got a meeting coming up next week here. Nothing's going to happen at this meeting per se as it relates to rates. But what should we be looking for? What should we be reading between the lines for? Are we trying to get some sense about September maybe would be a time when the Fed might move? What are you going to be looking at?
I mean, they'll never tell you. You know, they've still got the July meeting as well to worry about. So they'll never quite tell you that September is live. The dots are going to be the most important thing. You know, last time they were looking for 3 cuts. I think the majority of the committee will still be looking for either 2 cuts. There'll be a sizable plurality, let's say at 1 cut for the year. That'll be enough to tell markets that cuts are still very much on the table, and you're seeing it from other central banks as well. You know, you saw the Bank of Canada today. It's going to be the ECB. All these central banks are starting to cut.
So, I mean, does the U.S. like I guess again, I'm not a Fed watcher by trade, but I always thought kind of the Fed led the rest of the world in terms of bank policy here. But it seems like maybe some of these other central banks may be moving before the Fed. Is that unusual? Do we care about that?
It's a little interesting. I mean, we do tend to lead the broad swings in policy. These kind of more micro adjustments, not necessarily a problem. You know, in the case of Canada, for example, they've got a much more leveraged housing market than we do. They've never quite adjusted after 2008. So there are peculiarities across regions. The ECB is slowing a little bit more in terms of their growth policy. What matters is the pendulum is starting to swing the other way because they are starting to see inflation slow down and growth actually start to moderate a bit.
If we're priced to perfection, how do you have a defensive strategy in bonds? Spread market is in. I'm not going to go into the details now, folks. We're too busy. But the answer is we're priced to perfection in stocks, tech, I guess just tech, maybe luxury. But we're priced to perfection in your world. How do you play defense?
I think you buy dips. I think that's how you play defense, because we know a cutting cycle is coming at some point. Now, whether it's coming in, starting in 3 months or it's starting in 6 months, how long it will take, that's something that we're trying to figure out. But we know that
good
yields.
luck with that.
Yeah, exactly. But yields are attractive from a longer term standpoint. And when you back up and realize that over 4% on 10-year rates is still quite attractive, over 2% on 10-year real rates is attractive, these are good levels to get in longer term. And they, carry
but
works.
The heart of the matter is your 4.30 10-year yield. Your bet is inflation gets well under 3%.
Correct.
Right?
And I think that's been happening as well. I mean, certainly
we're seeing it clearly,
yeah.
except for real estate and Paul Sweeney's breakfast at the Pancake Pantry in Nashville. Lovely. Other than that, but your bet's inflation comes in. It's all there is to it.
Now, it may not get all the way down to that 2% target. And I think that's certainly wishful thinking. Can it be between 2 and 3%? Absolutely. I think so long as it's got a 2 handle on it, the Fed's very much okay with inflation being at that 2 to 3% range, and that's enough for fixed income to actually, continue to move lower in yield.
It's just a headline, Paul, coming out now. Aramco's $12 billion stock offering. That's to what I was talking to Steve Wieting about. What's the animal spirit here?
Seems
and
pretty good.
The answer, Gennady, this is important. These tech companies.
Yeah.
The CFO's got to be screaming, we need to do a $20 billion deal now.
Yeah.
Laddered 30-year capital.
Well, that kind of goes.
Tuck it away.
That kind of goes to my question. As Tom was just suggesting, I got a 10-year Treasury at 4.29%. Where do you think that 10-year Treasury is year end?
So I've got it at 3.9%.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Just a little. So it seems like a while.
I'm just asking for people that like to refinance their mortgages that they took out the
All
last couple
Paul
of years.
cares about is the refund. It's the only reason it's here.
Yeah, I'm just asking for a friend, but
that's okay. I get that question a lot.
Yeah.
But I think 3.9 by the end of the year, it's not outrageous. You
Okay.
can see we moved quite substantially lower in just in the last couple of weeks. It won't take much. A couple of weaker inflation prints, and a couple of weaker payroll prints.
If we get Paul, where Gennady Goldberg is a TD, or Ian Lingen over at BMO Capital Markets, same kind of trend, maybe even more so. The frenzy of the haves, the financialization of the haves. Can I dare say it will be record-breaking in our lifetimes?
It seems that way.
You get a bank rate 30-year mortgage, 6.99%.
Yeah. I thought I got my 6% mortgage. I thought I was a chump, but now I feel like a rock star here.
I just saw a chart. 14% of existing mortgages are now out at like a 6 level or higher.
Yeah, it's getting there. It's getting there. So what's this? When you talk to people that are trading these things day to day, week to week, month to month, what's the trade out there in the rates market?
I mean, conviction levels are probably the lowest I've ever seen them.
Really?
And that's because we're all waiting for that next data point, right? We keep jumping from data point to data point, and the conviction levels are extremely low. I think a lot of the more seasoned portfolio managers realize that these are kind of golden levels.
You got to buy, don't you?
Yeah,
don't
you have to buy dips. The problem is you can't buy too early.
Okay.
Right? That's been the biggest
I don't
problem.
know.
Gennady, thanks so much. We have to go to the imagery that we see now at Normandy, just ending as a chaplain who was wearing an Army uniform from another time and place. And I have to say good morning to Jess Menton of the Fighting Texas Aggies. My father was a Texas Aggie.
Was he?
And the hat that the chaplain was just wearing was exactly the hat that my father had in his closet.
Yep.
And we see the remembrances at Normandy, where the president, I believe, is scheduled to speak here at any moment. Mrs. Biden next to him, and to his right, Emmanuel Macron. We will continue here trying to keep focus on the markets. The ECB, a hugely ambitious space launch today. We'll go into that. We're getting live feed from near Brownsville, Texas in about 5 minutes. And the launch, I think Michael Barr said, has been pushed.
Has it?
To
Okay.
8:50.
8:50, okay.
Yeah, Lisa Mateo said, we got to do the newspapers. They got to move the launch.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what we're doing there. We say good morning to all of you around the world on YouTube. Just extraordinary that you can join us so easily worldwide. It's just really, really quite successful. Red and green on the screen. The VIX says it all. Under 14, under 13, 12.73 on the VIX. Michael Barr leading our news coverage with Lisa Mateo. Paul Sweeney, I'm Tom Keene. It's Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures. NASDAQ futures seeing a little bit of a lift. That's up about 0.1% thanks to tech shares powering higher. Few examples. We have NVIDIA up more than 1%. Other tech firms, Micron Technology up 0.5%. Advanced Micro Devices up 1%. Even if we look at Europe, ASML Holding, ADRs up nearly 1%. ASM International ADRs up 5%. That's the tech outlook. Over to the bond market, we have the 2-year yield 4.73%, up 1 basis point. The 10-year yield 4.29%, and that's up 2 basis points. Companies making news, we've been talking about it. It's Boeing down 0.5% right now. It's Starliner set to dock at the International Space Station today. It was launched into orbit yesterday following a number of delays. And then this morning, Elon Musk SpaceX scheduled for a 4th major test flight of its Starship rocket from Texas. That liftoff now scheduled for 8:50 a.m. Wall Street time. We will keep you posted, and we'll carry it live right here on Bloomberg. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. I will put out on Twitter and LinkedIn the only book to read of Normandy, and frankly of the courage after Normandy to go across France. What an honor to have Rick Atkinson with me on a day of remembrance, I think 10 years ago. The Guns at Last Light is the only book to read. It is absolutely definitive. It is the final 3rd volume of his trilogy on what we did. It is very difficult reading, but I'll put that out on Twitter. This is the President of France speaks now, Mr. Macron, before President Biden. We'll give you those highlights as we can. As I should note, the Secretary of Defense sitting 3-4 chairs from the President and the First Lady as well. We have in our studios right now here on YouTube, on Apple CarPlay, the First Lady of BNP Paribas Economics, Yelena Shuloteva, joins us here. And I'm going to put up ground rules. There's so much news flow this morning. We're not going to ask her about SpaceX.
Okay.
We're going to focus on the jobs report. Anna Wong is creating a firestorm on life-death. Are we going to see revisions that pulls down the job formation of 2024 and into 2025?
There is some merit to this research for sure, and the data from the quarterly census survey of employment and wages is telling us that probably payrolls are not reflecting what the reality is on the ground. But let me just warn you, we don't know about the size of these revisions.
Right.
This data I revised too, by the way. We're only going to get a preliminary revision later this summer, and we're not going to get the final one until 2025. So I think there is a merit to think that job creation was slower. I don't think it's going to drive the Fed decision.
I would just say, Paul, the mail that we get from listeners and viewers across this nation is they agree with Dr. Wong. I'm getting endless emails saying, you guys are nuts on fully employed America.
Well, let's go to that tomorrow, Yelena. I mean, we're going to get, I guess, a change in non-farm payrolls, consensus 185,000, unemployment rate of 3.9%. To me, that seems really strong labor market. Are the headline numbers masking any weakness?
We are into a rebalancing stage. We are slowing down from numbers that we saw earlier this year. Yep. And that's a good thing. This is an expected thing that the Fed wants to see. So we're 200K for tomorrow, but this is like slower than the average pace we have seen since the beginning of the year. I think, we are at an inflection point as well, according to the JOLTS data that we received earlier this week. So, and that's a very interesting point, because the number of vacancies in the economy has fallen below 5%, the jobs opening rate I'm referring to. So that means we are reaching a point at which we may see increases in the unemployment rate. So so-called beverage curve is telling us that. To me, what's really important is not the level at which the unemployment rate goes to, it's the speed of the increase. So if we see a 4.1% unemployment rate in May and in June, that could trigger the SEM rule, actually.
Come on. You're a BNP Paribas, Riccadonna. I mean, and Shulteva, it's very difficult. Give me 4.x. At what 4.x does the Fed change its dialogue and try to not be ex post and get out in front of the train wreck? Is it 4.1 or is it 4.9?
I think 4.5 to be precise.
Oh, split the difference.
But I think it's really about the speed. So if we see gradual increases in the unemployment rate, and what we expect is around like slightly above 4% by the end of the year, that's not a concern. The concern would be to see an increase in the unemployment rate from new layoffs. It's not only about the level, it's about what's inside, about the details. So far, we have seen the increases in the unemployment rate coming from people joining the labor market. So out of the labor force into unemployment. If we see new layoffs, that would be a concern. And this is like the jobless claims data.
All right. Well, it's pizza and beer night tonight at the Squan Tavern down in Manasquan, New Jersey for me. Somebody's going to come up to me and ask me, are we having a soft landing? What do I tell them?
Well, the Fed would tell you don't jinx it, but
Okay.
and I can, say the same thing, but for now it looks like that's what it is. And the labor market is rebalancing, not falling apart. And at the same time, we have growth. We have consumers supporting economic growth.
Do. Yep.
And I frankly, I don't see why consumers should falter, at least this year. Obviously, the outlook for next year is getting a little bit more tricky, but at least this year, I think we're fine.
Well, for the labor market, how do we figure into, I guess over the last 3, 4, 5 months, we've had this discussion coming into the labor market discussion about immigration, the illegal immigration at the border, and how that's impacting the labor market. How do you guys think about that?
So it's tricky because it's always a question of the quality of data. But I think we're going to see a significant impact in wage data if it's really, about immigration. So what it means is that immigrants would reduce the price of labor, right? So, and that could affect other people's salaries as well. So we could see that in the wage data, probably not in payrolls data. Nonetheless, I think immigration is having a significant impact.
Pushing against the caution.
Right.
We'll give you a number on that non-farm payrolls. How much of a given non-farm payrolls is immigration up? 30,000?
Maybe more than that, I would say. It's really hard to estimate that neutral rate of payrolls. I don't think it's at 100, but it's not at a 200 either.
How do you respond to people critical of Biden, critical of this? I mean, I get the political angle, who say all the jobs are going to immigrants. All the job formation is due to, you're shaking your head. I knew she'd shake her head here. But, what do you say to those people taking shots
More
like that?
paychecks mean more spending. That's what I would say to them. And that supports the domestic economy. So it's great.
Right.
I'm an immigrant myself.
I was just going to say, you got off the boat, actually came through JFK. Did you come through JFK?
I did.
You come through JFK. What was your first job in America?
I worked at a mortgage company. That was my first job on a 10th day after I landed in JFK. We were, processing mortgages at the time when the housing market was booming before it crashed.
So you came from Russia. Did you know English before you came
I
here?
did. I worked for an American company.
You worked for an American
in
company.
Kostroma. That's
Kostroma.
Kostroma.
Okay,
Kostroma State University, Tom, right outside of Moscow on the Volga River. That's where you go.
Yelena, thank you so much. Yelena Sholateva with us on this news cram day. Nice there just to talk about economics. She's with BNP Paribas. So wait a minute. You're going social on us this weekend in New Jersey.
Yep.
Now, when you're at this place, are you having the beer of New Jersey, Anheuser-Busch, or are you having this disgrace that they make Rolling Rock beer in New Jersey, which is just un-American?
It is.
Or is there some craft beer that they prefer at the Sweeney household?
Budweiser in cans, Tom.
In cans.
In cans.
Lisa, I mean, Yelena, does this translate to you?
No, it does not.
I like
this
beer.
is just.
Yelena likes beer.
That's
the soundbite of the interview. I like beer.
You have to have Bud in cans.
In cans.
I just love it. I would drive out there just to see you.
Yeah, if you want something else, you have to bring it.
I'd get in a Bentley and go out and see Sweeney just to have Bud in cans.
Yep.
For those of you that don't know this Newark Airport, EWR, you go right in and the brewery's still there, right?
Oh yeah, right there. Right
Did you stop on your way back and pick up a case?
Pick it up on the way.
Fresh?
Yeah, but a little trouble getting into Newark yesterday. That's
Yeah.
weather. So.
I mean, Michael Barr only serves Strohs, and if he's out of that, he serves Schlitz. But
exactly.
the answer is bud in a can, right?
Exactly. That's where you go. It
Do you
was
think
great when I
Michael
was
Barr's
16,
ever had
17.
bud in can?
I'm sure he's had one or two in his day.
We used to line them up at lunch. We'd have 6 of them with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Oh, my. Tom, Paul, Lisa, thank you very much. President Biden is in Normandy, France. The band played as Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron walked out together to the ceremony. It has been 80 years since the Allied invasion of German-occupied France that turned the tide in World War II. Biden is there to thank the veterans still living from that conflict and to tie their fight to current battles to defend democracy today. Wendy Schiller is director of the Alfred Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy at Brown University.
This is what most presidents do with this particular anniversary. But, the world has changed a great deal in terms of the public support in the United States for intervening in international conflict. And that's just a reality that any president's going to have to deal with, whether it's Trump, who sort of wanted to be more isolationist, or at least get NATO to pay more.
Wendy Schiller at Brown University. President Biden is set to speak any second now. Ahead of the D-Day ceremonies, President Biden talked with ABC's David Muir about the war in Ukraine and Russian President Vladimir Putin.
He's concerned me for 40 years. He's not a decent man. He's a dictator, and he's struggling to make sure he holds this country together while still keeping this assault going.
Recently, the Biden administration granted Ukraine some leeway in using American-made weapons, which Russian President Vladimir Putin called a threat. Jurors who will decide whether President Joe Biden's son is guilty of federal gun charges will hear more testimony today. Prosecutors say Hunter Biden lied when he swore he was not a drug user on a federal form when he bought a .38 in 2018. Finally, SpaceX is poised to launch its massive Starship rocket on a 4th major test flight this morning. It's part of the company's ongoing journey to ready the system for regular flights to orbit and beyond. Liftoff is scheduled now for 8:50 a.m. Eastern Time, and Bloomberg will carry it live. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it, Michael Barr. Paul Sweeney, this launch is something.
Yeah.
We all make our equivalency to Saturn V. I even think the younger people do, and this is by no means a Saturn V. It is modern technology, and it's basically engineering to fail. I can't emphasize enough how this is not engineering to perfection. They're not launching it knowing they're going to nail it. They hope they do. But they're launching it experimenting with really difficult tensions along the flight. And the greatest one is one stage comes down nearby, it lands in the ocean and is retrieved. I still don't get that. I've seen video. It's like the Flat Earth Society. I really haven't seen them do it. But now they're going to retrieve another part of the spaceship. And folks, I'll be right on this before we get to 8:50. I believe in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
Like halfway around the world.
And how do they find it? I don't know, but they know what's going on there. But the engineering,
the ambition here is extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, it's kind of the same feeling as the late '60s. Just the awe of the engineering here.
Right.
And how do these people think of this stuff?
Well, they think of it, and
to
give you an idea. Part of the fuel away from LOX, liquid oxygen, is methane. And the reason they're practicing and studying methane is because if this thing goes to Mars, they got to manufacture gas on Mars, and you manufacture methane.
Yeah.
You don't manufacture some of the other rocket fuels that they use. You like how I'm doing this?
Yeah, I don't know.
You should have seen the quality F I got in inorganic chemistry. It was an act of God. They went to physical chemistry later in college and said, "No, Mr. Keene, you go.
You're good.
You're good. Go talk about the stock market." We're going to talk about it now. Red and green on the screen. Into the jobs day tomorrow. We'll go beneath the headline data at 8:30. Important data here at 8:30 this morning on YouTube. Stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures this morning. We'll head over to the bond market. The 2-year yield 4.74%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.30, and that is up 2 basis points. Over to commodities. We have spot gold higher at $2,361 an ounce. We have Brent crude $79 a barrel. WTI crude at $74 a barrel. Companies making news. We'll start with Paramount. They're up a tenth of a percent right now. The battle over the company continues. Sources saying John Paul Zajuria, he's the co-founder of Patron Tequila, Paul Mitchell Hair Care Products, he's making a bid. He's saying he's part of a group of investors led by film producer Stephen Paul, which made an offer that beats David Ellison's. To American Airlines, where flight attendants union, it's rejected an offer from an immediate 17% pay raise. They'll rejoin again June 10th. And since we're talking airlines, if you're ever tired of having to check in with multiple times when you book multiple airlines, that could change. The One World Alliance, it includes American, British Airways. They're planning to launch a platform this year that will let you check in just once, even your luggage. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Just huge news flow today. Right now, we've got a key conversation on the equity market. We're going to stay with economics, finance, and investment. We monitor the shores of France. We monitor outside Brownsville, Texas, as well, among other news items this morning. Bloomberg Surveillance, we're brought to you by Interactive Brokers Bond Marketplace. Access their vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities with no markups, no built-in spreads, and low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. Hugely anticipated. Mike Wilson of Morgan Stanley, their CIO, and I just simply can say so many of the contacts I have, people in restaurants come up, emails, sonar, smoke signals I get coming in, agree with Mike Wilson. He joins us now, somewhat cautious on this great bull market. Mike, how does a cautious bull play the madness of this technology rally?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to phrase it, Tom. I mean, you know, it is a bull market in a lot of different areas of the market, and many parts of the market are in a bear market. And so that creates a really good opportunity at the stock level and at the index level. Now, of course, everybody knows about the, concentration in the index. Everyone knows about the, incredible outperformance of the high quality growth stocks relative to, say, low quality small caps. And that's what we've been doing, is we've been really trying to create the relative value trades within the market. The one that's been the most consistent, there's been several over the last 18 months. And and by the way, I should have set the stage. It's a late cycle economy, and a late cycle economy, full employment. The Fed is fairly tight. They're maybe about to start cutting. Typically, large cap quality is the place to be, and that is essentially the S&P 500. Mm-hmm. So that all makes sense. And I think there's a sort of this appetite to want to veer away from that, to go down the quality curve. Everybody saying, well, we can't keep buying the same stocks. And the reality is that's the way it usually is at the end of a cycle, and it can go on for longer than you think.
Mike Wilson, if we get a breakdown in yields, and I've got a 10-year real yield, 1.99%, check, yes, 1.99%. If yields actually break down for whatever Ellen Zentner reason, how does that change equity dynamics?
Well, I mean, look, it depends on why yields are falling, okay? So if yields are falling because the Fed is going to give us some sort of insurance cuts here, which is Ellen's view, and quite frankly, that's the Fed's view too, right? They're not, I mean, they're signaling they're going to cut rates because they can, not because they have to. And in that environment, well, that kind of speaks to more of the same, which is that we continue to see, high quality stocks outperforming. Now, by the way, it doesn't have to be 7 stocks. It can be areas in industrials. It can be some healthcare stocks. It can be consumer stocks. But what usually does well is, as rates come down slowly because growth is slowing but not crashing, is that's, higher multiples. And that's the environment we're in. And that probably persists. Now, things are stretched on a valuation basis, and we've written about that. That's why we're not as bullish as others in terms of where the index can go over the next 6 or 12 months. And so therefore, we're trying to find opportunities away from the stocks that have already run. And I would say the other theme that's worked really well is operational efficiency. So companies that maybe aren't growing as fast in the top line, but are doing a phenomenal job of managing their businesses to, generate cash flow from whatever revenue they are getting.
Hey, Mike, talk to us about, I guess, the industrial economy here. Is this a sector we should be looking at away from the Magnificent Seven? I mean, I've got a government that's talking about a lot of fiscal stimulus here, a lot of investment spending going forward over the next decade or so, and maybe even some rates coming down. Is the industrial sector someplace where people should be looking for some opportunities?
Well, we think so. We've been talking about this for about a year now, and for the reasons you've mentioned. In many ways, I would say the industrial sector has more legs to the stool than the technology sector, right? The technology sector has AI spending, but quite frankly, core IT spending is somewhat in a recession right now because of all the payback from the COVID pull forward. Meanwhile, industrials have, the CHIPS Act program, they have the IRA policy, they have the reshoring, they have the infrastructure upgrades that are going on all over the world, the green infrastructure sort of retrofitting. So there's a lot of sort of irons in the fire that can drive strong revenue growth for capital goods companies. Now, once again, not all industrial companies are created equal, right? Now, they're not all going to benefit equally from this sort of trend. But, the capital goods companies that have exposure to those types of spending should continue to do well.
So one of the other areas, Mike, a lot of folks think about is just, how about this energy space here? We've got WTI crude oil now down below 75. It was, as high as 90 just several weeks ago. What do we do with global energy here if this world is trying to move towards a greener energy space?
It is. I mean, look, I think energy longer term, intermediate term is probably still an attractive asset because we're going to continue to use fossil fuels even with the green transition. However, in the short term, energy prices have been under pressure for two reasons, I think. Number one, we've seen a little bit of a supply boost from OPEC talking about over the intermediate term they may continue to produce more. It looks like Saudi Arabia is trying to take share back, and prices have come down for that reason. But I also think there's a little bit of a sluggish demand picture that doesn't get a lot of attention. And this is one of our concerns about the broader market, which is that we still think there's a decent chance of, not just a soft landing, but also a hard landing and a no landing. And we just don't know the outcome there. And so we are watching the energy space closely as a signal that maybe driving demand as we go into the summer or other forms of demand for energy is not as robust as you might think, given the strength in the overall economy.
Mike Wilson, I got 1 minute left. How do you use cash now as a hedge? Are you fully in the markets with your caution, or is cash a constructive tool?
Well, you always have some cash on the sidelines. You should, as any asset owner or investor should. I mean, obviously, if you're an asset manager, it's a little different. And I do think the barbell of cash and high-quality stocks has been the place to be, and it probably will continue to be the place to be as long as we remain in this sort of late cycle, soft landing-ish outcome, right? So in other words, cash is probably better than long duration because long duration has risk, and you're getting another % return on front-end cash. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But being fully invested in high-quality stocks is also part of that strategy.
Mike Wilson, thank you so much with Morgan Stanley here on an exceptional Thursday into the jobs report on Friday. And of course, with all the news flow here at 7:54, 1 hour away from a scheduled launch in Brownsville, Texas of an engineering miracle. We'll see how that goes. Right now, the Secretary of Defense speaking on the shores of France, Secretary Austin at the podium, and behind him, President Biden, Mrs. Biden, Mr. Macron of France, and Mrs. Macron as well. I'd say a good 150 people behind a very large audience in attendance, and of course sprawled out in front, and the oldsters as well. We do songs at the end of the hour. The only equivalency, Paul, I can think of is Ted Williams of the Boston Red Sox, who served 2 tours of duty in the war. In the music business, a guy named Glenn Miller said, "Shut up, let's do it." He was almost killed by a missile in London before D-Day. Eisenhower said, "You're so important, you have to do this," in England, and he was lost at sea 5 months later. Glenn Miller on this D-Day.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation is still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, beleaguered with exceptional news flow. Lisa Mateo, less beleaguered this morning, looking at markets that are quiescent, red and green on the screen. The VIX showing that bull market we saw yesterday, 12.73. And as Paul mentioned, yields are the story, 2.00. I'm looking at the real yield, and I'm sorry.
Yep.
There's a changed landscape into the jobs report on Friday.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you look at the 10-year Treasury here, Tom, 4.3%. The 2-year, 4.74%. So a big pullback in yields here. So it's interesting to see how the market's discounting where this Fed may go, not only in June, but kind of, I think, really looking at the September.
My bingo card for this 8 o'clock hour, I had 4 ideas. Talk to Michael Barr about the Detroit Tigers, President Biden speaking at Normandy, a space launch later in the hour outside Brownsville, Texas, and King Charles is speaking at the British Remembrance and the Coast. President now going to the podium. We're not going to, Rich, we're not going to take President Biden's speech, right? We're going to look at the highlights, and we'll bring you the Bloomberg News headlines on the comments of the President of the United States at Normandy. We're going to stay with economics, finance, and investment. We'll get to that in a moment. And thrilled to bring you Jeffrey Yu of BNY Mellon. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by CohnReznick. Advisory Assurance Tax. CohnReznick can help you improve business resilience through a comprehensive risk management solution. Visit CohnReznick.com. Thank you, CohnReznick, for your support of our conversation. Part of that is Lisa Mateo with our Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning. We have a little movement in futures following the S&P 500's 25th record close this year. We'll head to the 2-year yield, 4.74%, up 1 basis point. The 10-year yield at 4.31%, and that's up 3 basis points. Companies making news, yes, it's NVIDIA. Shares up more than 1% after joining the $3 trillion club. Now trails only Microsoft as the most valuable company in the world. Bloomberg reporting NVIDIA, Microsoft, Apple now worth more combined than the entire Chinese stock market. Since we mentioned Microsoft, they're down about 0.3%. Want to point to this, the Wall Street Journal saying that the FTC looking into whether a Microsoft deal with AI startup Inflection may have been structured to avoid regulatory scrutiny. We shall see. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. On economics, finance, and investment, on the correlation of markets, Jeffrey Yu joins us right now, Senior EMA Strategist at BNY Mellon. Good morning, Jeff. Jeff, how correlated, how linked are we now? Or is it like a tech uniqueness, a tech separateness in the stock market?
I think people are wondering about tech separateness just in terms of risk appetite, but what strings everything together still, your favorite topic, real rates, driven by financial conditions. But this week is quite special for the Fed, I think. For the Fed, in terms of financial conditions, for the first time, maybe the dollar needs to move up the agenda. We've had the move in dollar MEX after the election, Bank of Canada yesterday, ECB as well. These three put together, chunk of dollar index, right? So if the dollar strengthens quite aggressively from here, I think the Fed will need to start to talk about it.
Are we repricing to a global disinflation?
We could be repricing, or the market's trying to reprice global disinflation or lack of inflation relative to the US, right? So I think that's the initial point, not something for the Fed to worry about. So benign neglect, one of those policy oxymorons that we love to hate, you can keep it for now. But if there's more aggressive moves, in particular in dollar Asia, dollar China, dollar yen as well, then I think the Fed will have its handful.
So, Jeffrey, what should, for our listeners and viewers over here in the States, what should we be looking for today with the ECB?
So the ECB will be asked two questions. One is, what do you think about the Fed? And the ECB will respond, we are not the 13th Federal Reserve District, right? So that's the standard answer. Secondly, and I think more importantly, is how many more cuts are to come. So if I look at Bloomberg and pricing right now, heading towards year end, about 2.5, I think that needs to be at least 3, if not more. So that's where the risks to dollar upside are. I say it's a risk for a stronger dollar because it's going to be a risk for the Fed.
Jeffrey, when you talk to your institutional investor clients over there in Europe, where do they see the best opportunities out there? I mean, boy, so many things. There's so much uncertainty out there. There's so many crosswinds. Where are you hearing maybe a consensus call or maybe an out of consensus call?
Unfortunately, the consensus call right now is lack of opportunities, right? So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Sticking with U.S. tech, sticking with the dollar for the time being. We thought that. And again, just look at the reaction to some key results in India, Mexico, South Africa, for example. These are going to be the key emerging markets up ahead. Lack of investment there as well. We still think the opportunities lie in Asia. Valuations are attractive on an asset point of view, from a currency point of view as well. But again, we need the Fed signal. So it's about the U.S. rather than about the underlying other economies to invest in.
How about just China broadly defined here? I mean, if I talk to 3 or 4 people, I'm going to get anything from uninvestable, quote unquote, to you have to be there. It's a big percent of the MSCI. You have to be there. Where are you guys?
Well, I think asset allocation needs to appreciate nuance, even though sometimes it is lacking. So our nuance is we are conservative on growth, but we are not conservative. We are positive on asset allocation because it is just so underinvested. And right now, if you go down the risk curve, looking at the equity market, looking at how things can perhaps re-rate, and also looking at the corporate bond market, where our clients, based on our custodial flow data, they've all but liquidated all their holdings, between 2018 to 2021. So that is where the opportunities lie, but also this needs to be tactical as well. Right. Heading into the July plenum, that's going to be important.
Jeff, Deborah Aiken did a huge luxury splash today for Bloomberg Intelligence, and of course that always is about, I guess, a resurgent China. Jeff, you on China, what's the real story here launching into summer 2024?
Well, it is about the household at the end of the day. So I think, if and the language from Beijing has shifted a bit more in favor of the household, has been a bit more in favor of helping things moving forward. Today, I saw a headline surrounding how to manage healthcare better. I mean, that's certainly a topic in the US, for example, how healthcare burdens hit households, right? So if that can actually be managed in China as well, help them with their household cash flow and then help them generate consumer demand. There's a bit more of an acknowledgement right now that the government needs to add that direction rather than just count on industrial policy.
Are they pulling away from this? I mean, I don't want you to do your inner Elizabeth economy here, but Jeff, let's go there. Are they pulling away from the stridency that we've heard from President Xi over the last 36 months?
So there is always room for nuance. I think you can have industrial policy. The whole world is looking for industrial policy right now, but also support the household. It is not a zero-sum game, especially internally. The rising tide lifts all boats. Why not? Why don't we have more rising tides? So I think that appreciation is starting to come through. So improving one sector of the economy doesn't mean it has to come at the cost of the other, and that's something Beijing is recognizing for sure.
Hey, Jeff, we went... I'm going to say 20, 25 years not talking about Japan, but boy, you spent some time over the last, 12 to 18 months. Maybe it's just Warren Buffett, but a lot of folks are talking about Japan here. What's the BNY Mellon view of Japan these days?
Well, we still think the yen is hideously undervalued at this point. So dollar yen downside is hard to get. But alas, I go back to about the dollar. Unless we get a strong signal from the Fed, Japanese investors, they are the marginal movers of dollar yen. They are not going to shift. They're happy owning plus 5% carry on US assets. But Japanese corporates, if they start to say, yes, weaker yen helps with earnings translation, but our margins are not improving. If that starts to hit Japanese equities, and we're hearing the head of the stock exchange talking about similar things, then maybe policy can start to shift them as well. But for the time being, I think the market, and to be frank, policymakers, they're happy where they are.
A little more time here with Jeffrey Yu. We're commercial-free through this half hour, waiting an anticipated decision of the European Central Bank. Jeff Yu, Canada cuts. I guess in 4 minutes, ECB is going to cut. Do you buy it? Are we finally on a trend of global G7 rate cuts?
Unfortunately, we are just not there yet, as much as I think the ECB will need to continue to cut, and I think the euro needs to be a lot lower from here. We know that I've been pushing for a parity view, bulk of the year, not going my way, but they need more support for the economy. It's about optionality. They're seeing demand hold firm, wage growth hold firm, not willing to commit right now.
The distinctive feature for me, Jeff, you in the algebra, is nominal GDP. I got a nominal GDP in Europe, in America, flat on our back of 3.8%, 4%. Some people suggest even higher. What's the animal spirit in Europe that Lagarde has to work with? It's not 4%, is it?
Well, animal spirits in Eurozone, I think, need to work off, again, where your financing costs are, real rates. What's the other side of nominal GDP? How high is your deflator? So if it's going to be driven by a high deflator and companies have pricing power, then they will be willing to move as well. Either that or you begin to reduce costs. Animal spirits, I think, two factors. One, financial conditions need to loosen more, but secondly, reliant on some degree of industrial policy, fiscal support. That's what the US and China have right now. Made in China 2025, the IRA, Europe is still lacking that.
One more question here. You mentioned euro parity call is well. I find this extraordinary, Jeff. Can we really go 108 to parity on euro, a weaker euro, stronger dollar?
So so frankly, right there, two things need to happen. So the Fed needs to be relatively resilient. We're looking for the first Fed cut September or so, maybe a follow-on one in Q4, but the ECB needs to do a lot more. So for the parity quarter come through, we need to have a chance of at least 3 cuts by the ECB, not more so. Right now, they're certainly not talking about it, but a lot can change over the next 7 months or so.
Jeff, thank you for the brief in this extended time, a real luxury. Jeff, for you. With BNY Mellon this morning. Paul, we've got to reset here.
Yep.
As we speak, in the presence of the President of France, King Charles, speaking just not moments ago, but within the recent hours at the British Cemetery at Normandy. The President of the United States speaking at this moment, I should say, in Normandy. We'll bring you the headlines of that as well. It's I think, what I would call an intense speech, to say the least.
Tom, I'm looking at some of the veterans from D-Day there on hand. And you got to think, if you do this in a big way every 5 to 10 years in terms of remembrance of the D-Day landings, this may be the last time we see these fine folks here. So, that in and of itself is another side story. You're looking at some of these folks.
And many so fragile in England did not travel to France and did attend yesterday's events at Portsmouth, where all of this began early on a June 6th morning. We're waiting for the ECB in 2 minutes. We'll have that for you. Widely anticipated to see a rate cut. That is, to be kind, under debate.
Yep, exactly.
I should say.
And so it's to me, it just feels a little unusual that the Fed has not been the first. The U.S. Federal Reserve has not been the first to kind of move on rates. We may see the ECB, the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada move in first vis-a-vis the Fed. But I think the Fed says, hey, we're looking at this U.S. economic data, and we don't see any real need right now to move. And again, we'll hear from the Fed.
Well,
next
now
week.
is a data dependency, and frankly, if you get movements in the bond market to a lower yield just in the next 48 hours, if you get a jobs report that finally cracks, to be critical, Paul, many of our guests not suggesting that the job market will crack. I want to really make that clear. There's out there somewhere, late summer into 2025. But I don't really hear anybody saying this is the month where it's going to crack.
No, and if you look at the consensus, Tom, for tomorrow, the change in non-farm payrolls, 185,000 is the consensus. That's up, 10,000 from last month. So that's not a crack, Tom.
That's not a crack at all. And you say, what should it be? Well, I'm going to say editorialize under 100,000. But I know David Kelly at J.P. Morgan said some very careful thinking on this, and we just await a labor market.
And I'm looking at earnings, average hourly earnings. The consensus is for a rise month to month is 0.3%. So
Torsten Slok with the Sweeney chart today. You're the only one that travels. And TSA travel is record highs.
Yep, TSA
persistently.
Yes, and but I'll tell you, you know what? I'm going to put a shout out to the TSA and the folks that we just zipped through my last two.
It's getting
Newark
better. It is getting better.
Nashville back to Newark. Boy, it was solid. I mean, very
well. They knew
very
team
well
surveillance
done.
was coming in. They give you special treatment.
Exactly.
As well. If you don't, Alex has a tantrum. You know, I mean, it's
Yeah,
the way it is. Folks, it's an extraordinary news day. Stay with us, and particularly stay with Michael Barr to give you news updates. And now, with Lagarde's press conference coming up in a bit, we have a set of ECB headlines coming out. We wait for them across the Bloomberg service. And there is the historic headline: the European Central Bank cuts the deposit facility, cuts the main refinancing rate to the anticipated 4.25%. The ECB determined to return inflation to 2%, no decimal there, 2% in a timely manner. They speak of the balance sheet, the dynamics of their flows, which I have trouble keeping up with, frankly. They say it's now appropriate to moderate the degree of restriction. I think that will be the fine line that we'll see from Christine Lagarde. I want to make clear the ECB comes out with much more conversational headlines than what we will see on June 12 from the Fed. Here's the important numbers, in that they see 2026 inflation at 1.9%. That's where they've been.
Okay.
They see 2024 inflation core up 2.8% to 2.6%. They stand ready to adjust all instruments. Too many headlines to digest. To do better, we speak with Monica Defend, head of Amundi Institute, of course, of Europe, on this ECB decision. Monica, just to frame this for Lagarde and the challenge of the press conference, is there disinflation in Europe?
Yes, we think that the trend is there, but the direction won't be linear. So we do expect a little bit of stalling and then volatility. And on the back of this, probably we will have actually the cut today, but we are not expecting a cut to come in July. Just because on this disinflation that is taking longer and is lower than expected, they are not really in a rush to cut further.
Paul, I see on the nominal GDP question, core inflation, they're 2-ish, I'm going to say, as a conversational point. And they get out to growth, which is not what you'd expect from the Fed. Next year's growth, 1.4%, down 1/10. So you got a nominal GDP that is different than the nominal GDP of the party you're going to in New Jersey this weekend.
Exactly. So, Monica, is this the ECB telling the markets, global Wall Street, that inflation in Europe is in check? Is that what we're hearing today?
Yes, this is probably what is happening. But if I can go back to your point before, having in mind that the central banks won't target the GDP growth, it's really on the output gap. And this might help us explaining what to expect from the central banks, notably the Fed, moving forward, where the output gap is narrowing and is expected to progressively narrow further.
So, Monica, give us a sense of just kind of broadly defined how the EU economy is today. Does the EU economy need these rate cuts, or is it kind of rebounding on its own?
Well, the EU economy has proved to be less resilient than the US. We came out of the post-pandemic in a slower manner, but we think that now, at least for the second half, we are just approaching to potential. So we are coming from south, approaching the potential growth. Obviously, within the Eurozone, there are countries that are really running at different speed. And this is, if you want, complicating the job that the ECB has to do.
So given that backdrop, Monica, when you talk to your institutional investor clients at Amundi, where are they looking for opportunities if they're willing to take some risk in this market?
Well, we really need to have magnifier lenses. So because top down is really difficult to find convincing structural investment opportunities. When it goes to Europe, probably having the ECB set for further cuts and the cycle that is expected to renew some momentum, small cap, might be an interesting opportunity, as well as UK equities, for example, just because of the its sector, the equity composition, the sector composition of the equity market. When it goes to the US, probably our clients are a little bit more cautious, where there are plenty of opportunities in emerging markets.
Monica, is there a divide at the ECB? Lagarde has done such a good job of straddling the political tension, but on this historic day of a rate cut in the ECB, even around an inflation forecast that lifts, that in itself is absurd. But Monica, how big is the division, say, between Germany and Finland? I mean, just as one example.
When it goes to inflation, for sure there is, just because oil prices have been impacted in a different way, the two regions, and going in that granularity is what I meant with having such a hard job when it goes to the ECB decision. But having said that, probably there is this core of countries that, because of the weight that they have also on the markets, that I'm not saying are in the driving seats, but possibly are definitely relevant as a market impact, at least.
Do you agree that there's a little bit of vibrancy here in the Eurozone? They look at a growth lift for 2024. Do you agree?
Yes, yes, I agree. And we really think that because of the Olympics, because of tourism, there are there is going to be some seasonal momentum. Obviously, what the Euro area needs is an industrial policy that can set the region into a longer structural higher trend.
Monica, thank you so much. Monica Defend with us with the Amundi Institute this morning. The headline from Bloomberg, synthesizing all this together. For those of you across America, the European Central Bank delivers landmark rate cut, but few signals on the next step. And that segues, Paul, perfectly to a press conference. Rich, when do I see the Lagarde press conference? Today, 8:45 today.
Wall Street time, yep.
Okay, well, it'll be interesting. She's going to make an opening comment.
Yep.
And then she's going to say nothing. And then there's going to be a Q&A.
Right.
And this is not a secret. I have made clear I feel the Q&A in Frankfurt is more intense than the Q&A. They need McKee over there.
They do.
I mean, there's no question about it. McKee could do the press conference, do a 3-hour Frankfurt lunch, and fly back on the Gulfstream.
Yep, exactly. I don't know why he
I don't know why we're not doing that.
Yeah, just looking at some of the top live reporting here, Tom, on the Bloomberg terminal. The initial market reaction is rather muted in terms of the euro. The currency reversed modest losses to trade a little bit higher at 1.0878, while the 10-year German yield now is up about 4 basis points. So again, kind of muted response in some of the European markets and the currencies and the bond markets there. This was a rate cut that was expected, and I think pretty much in line with expectations. So now I guess, this kind of puts the focus a little bit back on the Federal Reserve for next week, and we'll see what we get.
In our news flow this morning, and Michael Barr is monitoring this, now at Normandy, soldiers, sailors, and airmen at attention and saluting, including, Paul, some people having assistance with their salute because they're 98 years old.
Yeah, and 100, and it's just amazing to see those folks still there, and God bless them. But
gentleman off his wheelchair holding 2 canes as he stands up to hear a national anthem.
And wouldn't you love to hear his story from 80 years ago, what he experienced?
The story is, I'm glad you mentioned this, and with immense respect for what Ken Burns and Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg have done. These guys say the movies don't capture it.
Yeah.
That's basically what I hear.
Yep.
We don't want to know.
Yeah.
Is basically what gentlemen 95 and 98 say.
Yeah, I tell the story a lot. My father's generation, World War II generation, they'd all come over for their various dinner parties and things at our house. Some people would talk about it, and some people would not talk about it.
They did not talk about it.
And you had to, when you found the person that would talk about it, you catch them in the kitchen or something and saying, hey, tell me a story. But a lot of the folks just did not want to talk about it.
All politicians playing for the home audience, the president no different. This is the headline from the president of the United States. Mr. Biden says isolationism was an answer then, and it's not the answer now. That from the president. They will continue with events through the day.
And you think about that history, Tom, about, the isolation was running very strong in the United States in those 38, 39, 40, up until December 7th.
And a state dinner tonight, I believe it's tonight in Paris before the G7 meetings. I believe our Anne-Marie Horton is attending the G7 meetings. I don't have that confirmed, but I talked to her people who talked to my people.
I know, I understand.
And, we'll have full coverage of that. Caroline Cohn leading all of our coverage out of Paris as well. Best job in Bloomberg. Caroline has the best job.
She's the best. Yep.
I think they're serving coq au vin or something basic, beef bourguignon, something like that.
Yep.
At the state dinner.
I mean, I'm guessing the French know what they're doing over there.
On the markets with the space launch, Rich, am I right? The space launch scheduled 25 minutes. 850. Thank you.
Okay.
And right now in Normandy, cannon with real fire and the cannon smoke.
Wow.
In the distance, shooting out over the English Channel. We're looking at the markets as well. They retreat ever so slightly. NASDAQ green on the screen. The VIX 12.72. Patrick Armstrong scheduled to be with many other good guests, including Michael Barr on this day of exceptional news flow. From New York City on YouTube, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We are just moments away from jobless claims numbers for last week. It comes after yesterday's private payroll reading that showed hiring at companies grew at the slowest pace since the start of the year. The services sector, that actually expanded by the most in 9 months. Now, the survey was for 220,000. Let's see, it's coming in at 229,000. That's what the actual is. And this really sets the stage for tomorrow's U.S. jobs report. So let's get to the market reaction. We have NASDAQ futures still up about 0.1%. We have Dow and S&P futures still little changed at this point. We have the 2-year yield at 4.72%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.29%. And that is little changed as well. To earnings we go. We'll start with Big Lots down 15%. It reported comparable sales for the first quarter missed estimates. Then you have J.M. Smucker up 2%. Fourth quarter adjusted EPS beat estimates, although their sales missed. And people love their leggings. Lululemon shares up 9%, raising its full-year profit outlook. But what people, particularly kids, don't love as much, it's Squishmallows. Those are those plush toys that Five Below says, well, just bought too many of them. It cut its sales forecast for the entire year. That is their shares down 17%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. I mentioned earlier the cinema and how many of these heroes of D-Day, those that survived, say, maybe not.
Well, you know, Tom, Saving Private Ryan, for me at least, that is the movie that brought me, I think, as close as...
I agree, and it showed how difficult it was after the first days of Normandy.
Yeah.
And they didn't anticipate the struggle.
The first 15 minutes of Saving Private Ryan, I've seen Spielberg and Tom Hanks interviewed for this, and they went to extraordinary lengths to try to make it as real as possible. And I'll tell you, just for me, I felt like I was there.
At Normandy, after Macron and Biden speak, Secretary Austin as well, Tom Hanks in attendance at Normandy on this 80th anniversary. We are attendants of economic data that leads us forward into market summary. We'll get to Patrick Armstrong in a moment. Our economic indicators, including claims today and on to jobs tomorrow, brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. In attendance at Normandy as well, the former Secretary of State, John Kerry, he of his public service to the nation and military service, I should say, at Vietnam as well. We'll try to point out other dignitaries as they move on to further events. I would say, just quickly here, without question, the most emotional thing I've seen today is King Charles speaking in French at the British Cemetery at
It was just good to see him out in public.
We are 15 minutes away from Lagarde in the ECB. It is not a normal meeting. For those just joining, the ECB with Canada leads with rate cuts. And then on to a space mission scheduled 8:50 in 20 minutes. I don't know where we go in the 9 o'clock hour, maybe more with Normandy. The news flow today, extraordinary. So patient is Patrick Armstrong with Plurimi Wealth Management. Patrick, I look at the news flow, and so much of it, particularly looking at yield, is finally, we're cutting rates in Canada, in Frankfurt. Is it a finally June where we shift?
Well, in Europe, we've begun a rate cutting cycle. So Switzerland and Sweden just front ran the ECB by a couple of months. And it's not certain this won't be viewed as a mistake at this point. When they laid out their framework, they were certain they were going to cut. And economic strength, a bit of persistent inflation has led them to raise their inflation outlook for 2025. But they couldn't change their mind on the cut anyway. So they've upped their inflation target for 2025 to 2.2%, so above their target. But they're cutting anyway. 2024 probably is the year where most central banks do get into a cutting cycle because they view their rates as restrictive. I've been questioning if they are restrictive when I see meme stocks, when I see the strength of the economy, still pretty resilient job market as well. But I think this year is the year we do see the of cuts. I'm not sure how far they're going to go because there still may be inflation surprises.
You take such a holistic view, and particularly with your writings with the FT, which are always appreciated. Patrick Armstrong, do you equate the exuberance of tech, the exuberance of equities in general, to the presumed disinflation that we see across G7 banks?
It makes sense. It's plausible. The innovation and the productivity gains you're going to get from AI and just technology in general is disinflationary. I'm not in the disinflation for long camp because I think what overwhelms that is populist policies, isolationist policies, and nationalistic policies. So I think you've got two competing poles in different directions, and I think it's the populism and the protectionism that are going to create more durable inflation that people don't necessarily want, but it's how you keep your job as a politician. It's how you get elected as a politician, as you cut taxes and raise spending, and you've got to print new money to pay off for that debt.
Patrick, I know you and your team at Plurimi, you think globally, you invest globally here. As you step back and maybe sit at a Monday morning global asset allocation meeting, where's the conversation start for you guys these days?
What surprised us, and that's usually the most interesting talking point, is you have seen economic surprises to the downside in the US just over recent weeks. And Europe's actually been in the other direction, where the economy is generally surprised to the upside. And it's not been an order of magnitude very different, but the US has just consistently beaten through the first 4.5 months of the year. And I think economists caught up with reality, and the numbers that have recently been coming out haven't been terrible, but they've not been surprising to the upside anymore, where you are seeing a little bit more resilience in the European economy coming through. Services has been very strong both in Europe and in the US side of things, but I think that's one thing that has changed recently is you are starting to see Europe participate in this recovery, where the US was ahead of it by at least a year.
But when I invest in Europe, Patrick, I guess I go in there with an understanding that I'm not going to get much of a tech kick here. So am I playing on the consumer? Am I playing upon the industrial might of Europe? Maybe China's not as bad as we think as a customer?
Yeah, we don't use Europe for a tech play. My tech holdings, I've got NVIDIA, I've got AMD, I've got Applied Materials, and I've got some of the other Magnificent Seven ones. We've got Amazon and Meta and Google as well. So all US-centric. You can definitely make a case for ASML in Europe as belonging there. We've just decided to go with the US companies there. European economy, you've got the Novo Nordisk is the darling. It's up 3% again today. You've got strength in the luxury kinds of companies. So it's not about innovation. It's not about technology. But you do have a more cyclical element in Europe, and I actually think the market will probably reward that cyclicality in general right now.
Patrick Armstrong, thank you so much. Too short a visit today with the news flow. We've got to leave too early. Patrick Armstrong with Plurimi Wealth Management. We are going to a Lagarde press conference here in a bit, and then to Brownsville, Texas, outside Brownsville, Texas, to an extraordinary engineering feat. We'll give you scope on scale on that here in a moment. Red and green on the screen, a quiet to the market, 12.70 is the VIX. Euro, okay, it's a little bit weaker, I guess, 1.0886. It's sort of unched. It's very unched off this historic moment, widely communicated and telegraphed as well. Always communicating with our news. And New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. They walked down the aisle side by side, France's President Emmanuel Macron and U.S. President Joe Biden, the two nations, allies for centuries, marking D-Day. Some U.S. veterans made the pilgrimage back to the shores of Normandy for the 80th D-Day anniversary commemoration. President Biden addressed the crowd.
On behalf of the American people, and as Commander-in-Chief, it's the highest honor to be able to salute you here in Normandy once more. All of you, God love you.
Ahead of President Biden's speech, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke at the ceremonies.
We bow our heads to remember the more than 9,000 U.S. and Allied soldiers killed or wounded on D-Day by Hitler's forces. On behalf of the United States Department of Defense, I am here to give thanks, inadequate as that word may be.
French President Emmanuel Macron.
Here you came to join your efforts with our own soldiers and to make France a free nation. And you are back here today, at home.
The D-Day invasion is credited with turning the course of the war over to an eventual Allies' victory in World War II. The criminal trial of President Biden's son, Hunter, resumes this morning in Delaware. The prosecution could arrest its case today. Hunter Biden is charged with lying about his drug use when he purchased a gun in 2018. In about 10 minutes, SpaceX is poised to launch its massive Starship rocket on a fourth major test flight. Starship is key to launching SpaceX's future satellites and ferrying humans to the moon and eventually to Mars. We will have that launch live in a few minutes. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thank you so much. In the not too early morning of Texas on the Gulf of Mexico, there is a ginormous rocket. We're going to give you details on that, scope and scale, particularly the analog we all have, which is the Saturn V Apollo rocket of another time and place in history. But we have a distraction, Paul. We have the launch of rhetoric in Frankfurt with Christine Lagarde. The headlines sort of pre-communicate what she's going to say in the first couple minutes.
Yeah, I mean, cutting rates. And as we heard from Patrick Armstrong and Plurimi, we've seen some better economic data points coming out of Europe, yet the ECB sees fit to pull back a little bit on the tightening of rates there, as they think they've got perhaps inflation under control.
And probably 40 headlines to go through. We're going to try to be judicious and not have you turn off YouTube or turn off Apple CarPlay. ECB to keep rates sufficiently restrictive as long as needed.
Yes.
That's a new economic phrase. Okay. As long as needed. Inflation this year, core, lifts. Let me say that again, it's so important. Inflation lifts. You heard Monica Defend of Amundi say because of the Olympics, one idea. They've just misguessed growth. We see that from the governor of the Bank of England. Andrew Bailey has said the same thing. This year, inflation from 2.6, they now model 2.8. Inflation next year lifts from 2% to 2.2%.
Yep.
And you look out, what do you think the Red Sox are going to do in 2026? I have no clue. In 2026, they've got a level, 1.9%. So somewhere out there in 25, they are modeling disinflation. And yet they cut rates this morning. And I thought Patrick Armstrong, Paul, he pushed against that.
He did. I mean, I'm just looking at some of this Bloomberg reporting here, and Christine Lagarde, says not pre-committing to any particular rate path, so trying to keep some optionality on the table here. But certainly we've got, this first rate cut, but we still have inflation there. I mean, it's moving in the right direction like it is in the U.S., but it's still there, and it's still there for a lot of people across the economy. But again, they saw enough of the disinflation here to European Central Bank cuts key interest rate by 25 basis points. The deposit rate, which is their rate that they look at, falls to 3.75%, moving off of what was a record high.
Euro 108. We saw, thank you, Jeffrey Yu, who looks for euro depreciation, a weaker euro, even through parity. That's a bold call to say the least. He maintains. He made very clear it's going against him right now. Economic growth that Lagarde will address is better than good. 0.6 was a statistic. It's 0.9. What a shock. It sounds like the United States. Growth is better. Maybe it's a little bit of stimulus in the land of austerity. We'll have to see.
Yep. So it's interesting. I mean, the ECB statement says the inflation outlook has improved markedly. That's a quote there. I'm not sure what that really means in a context of they're taking their 2025 inflation projection a little bit higher here, but I guess they see enough underlying moderation in inflation that they feel like they can maybe pull back on rates.
In the heart of it, out 2 years, ECB 2026 growth, folks, I'm sorry, if you modeled this in America, politically, it would be difficult.
Yeah.
1.6%. That's I guess, where we're going to in Europe. Add on inflation, and I'm sorry, to me, this is a head of the ECB folks talking in animal spirit across 17 or 23 or more fractious nations, different than the animal spirit that Jerome Powell has to contend with.
And Tom, I know your next trip over to Paris, I'm going to just give you a euro quote for you. 1.0887 on the euro, up just slightly here today. I thought we were going towards maybe parity, and be off to the
other way we measure
Paris.
this, folks, for those of you across America, is what I call United 5756, which is round trip EWR.
Really?
It's whatever,
That's
it's like,
what you do.
You take Delta, you take Air France, but the plane tickets are down, and is Torsten Sachs at Apollo? I'm sorry, people are flying.
Yeah.
And the tourism economy is an overlay on London, on Paris, on, frankly, the rest of Europe.
Yep.
I mean, Lisa Matteo, you're doing 2 weeks in Venice in August,
Of course.
right?
Yeah,
3
exactly.
weeks.
There we go.
3 weeks.
There she goes.
You can barely walk. I mean, the streets are narrow, like in Ripley.
Yep.
They have very narrow streets. I learned this. They have very narrow streets in Venice.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
the answer is you can't get down them.
You can't. I mean,
Because
and
of tourism.
the tourism is crazy. My offspring just got back from Switzerland, so another one person. Everybody's over there. It's just John Tucker and me are the only ones that haven't been to Europe.
I once had a conversation with Christine Lagarde about the set of the Fed for a press conference versus the set of the ECB. I have no control over what she does with her set, other than it's that Frankfurt blue that you expect from the euro. They're not flags. We have flags.
Yep.
The European flags with the wonderful yellow stars, and of course, the shock over there politically of Finland and Sweden joining NATO. That's separate from today's press conference. They have a photo gaggle. Is that the right phrase?
Yeah, I'll go with
that.
And they do their photo gaggle before
Now.
they actually start.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a
In
different...
attendance on the podium with two others. I assume Philip Lane is there. And we await comments from Christine Lagarde. I do want to say, we're making the lightness of Bloomberg Surveillance about it, but this is an historic day, and of course prepares Christine Lagarde for Jackson Hole, which I assume she'll be attending.
I have to check if I've got my ticket for Jackson Hole.
You should. I think
you carry Michael McKee's luggage.
Mateo would be great out there.
Oh, yeah.
She'd be trout fishing.
Yep.
Horseback
riding, no question.
Like Ken Pruitt, could trout the size of your leg. They're not trying to throw for those of you on YouTube, this is scintillating. They're trying to throw the photographers off.
Okay,
now they're moving down the line like, Paul's at a Springsteen concert.
Exactly.
And they're going to come in here for important comments from Christine Lagarde. She was trade minister of France for Mr. Sarkozy. Of course, her leadership at the International Monetary Fund for years. Wolfgang Prossel now introducing Christine Lagarde and setting out the ground rules, which could be a really nuanced ECB meeting. Mr. Lane of Ireland, and no, I don't believe that's Mr. Lane. I stand corrected. But we're going to hear from Christine Lagarde. Of course, iconic, and particularly within America, at the International Monetary Fund, and a tour of duty, oftentimes fractious at the ECB. Here is Christine Lagarde.
Good day to all of you. Today, the Vice President and I are delighted to welcome you to our press conference. The Governing Council today decided to lower the 3 key ECB interest rates by 25 basis points. Based on our updated assessment of the inflation outlook, the dynamics of underlying inflation and the strength of monetary policy transmission, it is now appropriate to moderate the zero after 9 months of holding rates steady. Since our meeting in September 23, inflation has fallen by more than 2.5 percentage points, and the inflation outlook has improved markedly. Underlying inflation has also eased, reinforcing the signs that price pressures have weakened and inflation expectations have declined at all horizons. Monetary policy has kept financing conditions restrictive. By dampening demand and keeping inflation expectations well anchored, this has made a major contribution to bringing inflation back down. At the same time, despite the progress over recent quarters, domestic price pressures remain strong as wage growth is elevated and inflation is likely to stay above target well into next year. The latest Eurosystem staff projections for both headline and core inflation has been revised up for 2024 and 2025 compared with the March projections. Staff now see headline inflation averaging
Christine Lagarde adapting to the headlines that we saw half an hour ago. Again, the euro right now 108.85. We'll continue to monitor ECB headlines. The Q&A could be really sprightly, although they make clear almost a feeling, Paul, of a one-off move. There was no tendency to a Greenspannian measured in the headlines from the ECB.
Yeah, I don't see any commitment by the ECB for a continued path of rate cuts. It seems like the Fed, perhaps data dependent, and will take it as it goes. That seems to be what we're hearing from the ECB.
We are now going to move to a launch of Elon Musk's SpaceX. I can't emphasize enough the importance of this from an engineering standpoint. The Raptor engines of 33, many more times larger than Saturn V. The thrust and the velocity substantial as well. I don't have the time.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
All right, 30 seconds into flight. The rumbles are still building here in the Raptor's nest.
On
We're seeing
YouTube,
32 out of
right
33
now.
engines lit
This
on
is
the
the
Super
normal
Heavy right
launch
now.
of the SpaceX, and I really want to state this is the simplest part of this flight. For those of you on radio, Bloomberg Radio 1130, and on Android and Apple CarPlay, the image now of the 33 rockets at the bottom, the Raptor
All right,
rockets,
we just passed
is
through
extraordinary.
Max Q, so we're going to continue
It is
on up.
truly
We
out of
still
science
have
fiction.
about
Let us
a
listen in
minute and 30
again from
seconds until we
Texas.
get to stage separation. Starship now flying faster than the speed of sound. All right, so you got a couple of views. You got some ground trackers in your top camera there. You're looking down from the top of the booster in the bottom left, and then a camera in the top flap of the ship looking back in the bottom right, so getting a couple of different looks as Starship heads uphill. Once we get to hot staging, a lot of things happen all at once, simultaneously. We're going to light the engines on the ship, starting with the RVACs first, and then the 3 center sea level engines before we're separated. All of that exhaust gets plumed out the side of the hot stage, and then the ship will separate itself. All but the 3 center engines on the booster are going to shut down, so the booster never stops its thrust while we go through this hot stage maneuver. After that, the booster is going to do its flip, start heading back, and then the ship will be on its own power on its way to space. So that should be coming up.
I can't
in
emphasize
just
enough
about
what you're
30
hearing
seconds
now
from
is a
now.
complexity of rocketry
now,
that has
still
never
looking
been
in like
attempted.
32 out of 33
This is
Raptors
original engineering as they go from launch to ascent. And as you heard the gentleman say in Texas, the hot staging is a complexity unseen as we have a water landing once and then later a water landing twice. We need an expert with NASA Watch. We are thrilled Keith Cowling could join us again. Keith, this is not your grandfather's Apollo mission, is it?
No, it's not. As a matter of fact, this rocket could probably have sent 2 lunar landers to the moon. It's that powerful. And right now, as we're watching the, okay, I think we're hot staging. We dropped, okay.
Yep, just saw it.
Looks like we dropped the first stage. It's going away. The second stage is lit. And looks like, we're going up to outer space.
Keith, I want to emphasize the engineering, which you're expert at, in that to me, this is much more like Ranger in JPL of years ago, where Mr. Musk has said with NASA, you're allowed to fail. These engineering exercises aren't exercises of perfection, are they? They're really testing, understanding they well could fail on an unmanned mission.
Yeah, it's to be a nerd about it. It's asymptotic. You're getting closer and closer to perfection. You never really get there, but you have to get closer. in order to have something that's reliable. And in this case here, I mean, you see some of the shots before the launch, and you see they have the next couple rockets and it's stacked like corn silos. I mean, they're making these things like consumer products. It's not the handmade one-off things that NASA does. This is designed to be launch, test, launch, test, launch, test. Every launch brings down the risk, gives you more confidence that what you thought you were doing right is, oh boy, it's watching the live feed now. This is really something.
Keith, I want to get out ahead of the second water landing. I still can't believe, like Flat Earth Society, that we put a rocket up into orbital speed and we bring down the rocket and land it somewhere near Cape Canaveral or near Texas. And Elon Musk can do this. I still don't believe it, but I've seen it, so I guess it's true. Now they'll be hours away, minutes away, Starship engine cutoff, Starship entry, and they're going to bring the rest of the rocket down. Discuss that.
Well, first of all, you've got the first stage, and I haven't seen what's going on with that here. That breaks off, and that comes back into land. I don't know what's happened there. They're not showing that. The second stage, or the Starship itself, goes into orbit. And for this mission, they just want to get it into orbit, make sure that it can do all the things it needs to do there. But then they want it to come back into the Earth's atmosphere and the extreme heating that goes with that. And once they're done with that, they want to make it do the tricks that it needs to do to land, and then actually fire the engines as if it's going to land, but in this case on water. If they do all that, it's a success.
Yeah. Where do they land it on water, just to give our audience across this nation scope and scale?
The first stage is coming down somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico. The rocket, the spaceship, the pointy part of the rocket, the front end with the wings, that's going to come off just west of sort of, Southeast Asia, Australia, in the open ocean. And they've got a big block of, ocean, mapped out, telling people don't go there.
We're a long way from John Glenn or Walter Schirra, Perth. We hear you. Folks, just the point, you heard Mr. Cowling say the pointy end of the rocket is going to land somewhere in the vicinity of, I don't know, Australia or wherever. Keith, I want to go to the Mars mission that is a dream that will be out there many decades. This thing is fueled partly by methane. Explain the importance of a shift to methane if we're really going to be like Matt Damon and go to Mars.
Well, methane, natural gas, I mean, it's a known rocket principle. People never used it before because kerosene and other things were, gave a little more push for the buck. But on Mars, the atmosphere is very thin, but it's carbon dioxide. And if you go there using, very simple chemistry, bring some hydrogen and do some simple chemical, reactions, you can get carbon dioxide and oxygen and water all combining to form methane and oxygen, rocket fuel. So you can make your rocket fuel on Mars. So this rocket, these engines would work on Mars to land there, be refueled, and take off from Mars.
Keith Cowling, stay with us. Let's listen in to Texas in an historic moment during the hot staging and boost back burn.
Okay, here we go. Oh my God, that stage is coming in perfectly. Look at that. The first stage is coming right down to the ocean, firing its engine exactly as it should do, and then it's going to fall over in the water. Wow, that's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
Terminal guidance. And they're happy. They're happy out in Hawthorne, California. Very happy.
Splashdown of the super heavy booster. Love seeing it just tip over into the water before losing that footage.
They're a happy crowd
out there. The next milestone is coming up in about under a minute. The ship is going to shut off its Raptor
Rich, give me back to Keith Cowling, please, as they go to a next stage here. And again, we're going to go to engine cutoff in this historic effort to go into orbit and bring down a rocket somewhere and land successfully in the water off of Australia or Asia. Keith Cowling, how far are we from men on this SpaceX rocket?
Men or women or people? Yeah, we're getting closer. Right now, I think that they're just getting the basics of, can we send it up and bring it back? And that's the most important part. And then once you've done that reliably a bunch of times, then some brave souls get on it and fly. but you know, they may be a sporty group, but they kind of do want to come home because they probably want to fly again. So it's an iterative process. Each step gets you closer to the reliability that you want for a rocket that you want to launch multiple times a day to carry zillions of people to Mars.
On a systems analysis basis, is NASA working well with Mr. Musk and SpaceX? I think of some of the fractious relationships of Hughes or JPL years ago. I mean, is this a convivial conversation between the government and a private enterprise?
Yeah, and as much as they may have issues with how SpaceX does things, they're often in awe. And I guarantee you there's thousands of people at NASA who just put their pencil down and they're watching this saying, this is cool, because this technology, most of it was pioneered by NASA. SpaceX has just taken it to its ultimate, demonstration. And of course, this rocket, a variant of it, is how we're going to launch the lander that's going to land Americans back on the moon in a couple of years. This is a test of a NASA mission as well as a test of a SpaceX commercial rocket and a test of a way to get to Mars. 3 in 1.
Yeah, I want to emphasize to people on radio worldwide on Apple CarPlay, thank you so much for tuning in worldwide, this is not animations that you see. We have a rocket in orbit with live video, I believe, maybe a couple minutes delayed. I don't know about that. But this is not cutesy pie animation, Buck Rogers stuff from the 50s and 60s. It's real. And again, the effort here, Keith, help me here. Is it going to be an effort to get this rocket in orbit to actually land today in the Indian Ocean?
Yes, and is it in orbit? It will be in an orbital path. It'll get about 200 or so miles up. It's a big arc. So it's going around 2/3 of the Earth. But then it will come in and, again, test all the reentry procedures to make sure that coming back from 10, 15,000 miles an hour through the Earth's atmosphere is survivable. And then it'll go through all the motions that you would expect a 1950s rocket. They would play those videos when you and I were kids. And everything, including the landing, but then it's landing on water because that's the next flight.
Keith, thank you so much. We look forward to speaking to you again when Mr. Musk does Engineering Miracles. Keith Cowling, he's an editor at NASA Watch, hugely knowledgeable on the surrealness of these space missions, the engineering moving on from what we knew long ago. We have an exceptional news day waiting for John Stoltzfus of OPCO, the Secretary of State, now speaking from Normandy after the ceremonies and remembrances of an hour ago. They have just begun Q&A in Frankfurt, Germany for Christine Lagarde in the ECB. We will monitor those headlines. I would guarantee you there will be nuance in that, and we will continue to monitor SpaceX. Paul Sweeney looking at every mile of this. Again, it's an arc, I guess, Paul, and we're looking for Starship entry. And it's not gray slick, it's a rocket.
It looks like it's a rocket. I mean, it's out there in space at the moment. I'm just looking at some of the video coming from SpaceX, and it's just extraordinary. It was an amazing launch to see all those engines lit at one time. Great visual for the folks on YouTube. But boy, nice smooth flight so far. That's good news.
Good morning, all on Apple CarPlay. It is 9 a.m. Wall Street time, 30 minutes away from the opening. Red and green on the screen, the VIX 12.66. I'm watching the 10-year real yield. It's simple. It's pretty much flat, 2.01%. From the Interactive Broker Studios, we welcome Lisa Mateo, our Bloomberg Business Flash.
You got it. Good morning. Yeah, a little movement in futures after initial jobless claims that came in higher than expected. 229,000 unemployment applications filed last week. Now that comes ahead of tomorrow's U.S. jobs report. To the bond market, we have the 2-year yield at 4.74%. That's up 2 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.31%. And that's up 3 basis points. Currencies, the euro rose after the ECB cut interest rates as expected while raising its inflation forecast. We have the euro at 108.81. We have the dollar stronger, Japanese yen weaker. We have Bitcoin up just a fraction at 71,225. Companies making news, we got to point to NVIDIA. Their shares up more than 1%, became the first computer chip company to hit the $3 trillion mark in capitalization, overtaking Apple. Bloomberg reporting Nvidia, Microsoft, Apple now worth more combined than the entire Chinese stock market. Since we mentioned Microsoft, let's get to it, down 0.2%. The Wall Street Journal says the FTC looking into whether Microsoft deal with AI startup Inflection may have been structured to avoid regulatory scrutiny. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. Part of the job, away from market timing, get in the market. Get out of the market. Get in the market. Are people that say, you've got to participate. The math says a 3-year hold is short term. And everyone, including in your kitchen, on your deck, Paul Sweeney quaffing Budweisers in cans this weekend, is focused on the long term, Paul, which is what? To get out to August? Maybe September?
Exactly.
John Stoltzfus joins us because he knows you just got to be in the market to win. John Stoltzfus, how have you amended your bull market call in the last number of days?
Good morning, Tom, and thanks for having me on the show. Must say, really haven't amended it a hell of a lot. While we have recognized the fact that the utilities are really performing remarkably well, which essentially suggests to us that the market is becoming more confident on a Fed cut, and I think much more realistically now focusing on cuts for probably in November and December of about 25 bips apiece, maybe only 1 to 25 bips, and maybe just a continuation of the pause. But with, as other guests have said today on your show, indeed, it's coming, and the Fed has been remarkably successful at a hike cycle, 11 hikes, 7 pauses, or skips, as they call them, without putting us into a recession thus far.
Hey, what do you make, John, of these earnings here we've had? We just had a pretty, I guess, decent earnings period. Is it enough to support this market here if we have a Fed that's going to be kind of staying on the sidelines a little bit?
Paul, I got to say that the earnings we think are really pretty phenomenal. The overall number, shows growth at around 7.7% on the EA page on the Bloomberg terminal, and on back of earnings of around 4%. And that is much better than expected at the beginning of the earnings season for Q1. I recall, I think it was about that people were looking for about 3.9% in the surveys in terms of earnings growth. And when you look at it, it's 8 sectors, positive earnings growth. And within those 8, 6 of them double-digit earnings growth, only 1 of them a defensive sector, which is the Utes. But you've got communication services, you've got consumer discretionary, you've got information technology and financials with double-digit earnings growth. This is a big deal and very seldom mentioned. You have to lift up the hood, right?
Exactly.
Bring out the Bloomberg and lift up the hood.
You mentioned utilities. Is this just a play on AI, or is there something I'm missing here on utilities?
Paul, I think it's 2 things. One is most of the utilities, as I recall, in the S&P 500 ute sector are regulated. So they've been experiencing higher costs in terms of fuel and operational costs now. And so likely the regulators granted them increased billing. I mean, for those of us who have Con Ed, do we know it? But the reality is they're earning more because likely the regulators have naturally given them the ability to raise their prices. But the other story there is the longer term story, or the duration story, as we say nowadays, anything tech related. Likely is that Utes are likely to be huge participants in the build out of the new grid in terms of transporting electricity and the whole process of producing it. And that's the longer term story that I think investors who are intermediate to long term are looking for, on top of a dividend, on top of better earnings, et cetera.
Paul, years ago, did we have market timing? Was it as big as it is now?
I don't know. It's tough to do, that's for sure. Market timing.
What Stoltzfus has done, what Gina Martin Adams done, is a miracle. I mean, we're underplaying this, folks. Second leg of a bull market. Urian Timmer is arguing 7th inning or 5th inning, but these people had the courage to stay in the market.
Stay in the market. And if I want to stay in the market, John, in the fixed income space, do I just hang out with that 2-year treasury, or do I try to get a little bit smarter, maybe take some credit risk?
It really depends, Paul, on what type of investor you are. If you're really more adept at diversification, you can look for opportunities in credits and municipals. But certainly for now, the front end of the curve is a really comfortable place for putting cash into. Because you've still got an inverted yield curve related to the short end of the curve. So, but what we would say is we think bonds at this point are not competitive with stocks because for intermediate and long-term investing, we believe that it's stocks where you want to be. Just consider from the end of October last year when the rally began, October 27th through yesterday's close, the S&P is up 30.04%. If at that time one had decided to just with the 5% Treasury, which was around where the 10-year was, as I recall at that time, 4.8, 4.9, you'd still be waiting to get that 4.8, 4.9, and the S&P is up 30. Now, and Infotech, 44.93, communication services, 42.35, financials, who would guess it, up 31.1,
right, and
industrials, 27, and the last one that I'll mention is consumer discretionary, up 21%. Now, no guarantee of future results, but certainly to pause and ponder.
Right. John Stoltzfus, thank you so much with OPCO. Paul, I finally got my answer here. I'm sorry I didn't bring you in with Kikawa. We just got all carried away with the launch. 9:55 is when a miracle happens, if it's going to happen.
Right.
I can't fathom. They put a rocket up in Texas, and they're landing it in the Indian Ocean.
Nope. I mean, I thought the technology, I was glad to hear him report that because, you asked the question, how has the technology changed since the Apollo era? But it has.
And the materials as well have been amazing. I mean, their ability to land in the Indian Ocean here in 40 minutes, it's about the same as the rush of the Detroit Tigers to the pennant. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. While marking the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion at the American Cemetery in Normandy, France, President Biden delivered remarks on the day. Today, the president reflected on the unity the world showed that day.
Here, on the coast of Normandy, the battle between freedom and tyranny would be joined. Here, on that June morning, the testing was at hand.
More than 9,000 U.S. soldiers are buried in Normandy. Testimony continues in Hunter Biden's criminal trial in Delaware. Yesterday, jurors have gotten a look at the gun that he bought in October of 2018. Biden is accused of giving false information about having any drug abuse on a form before buying the .38. House Republicans have issued criminal referrals against President Joe Biden's son and brother. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports from Washington.
The Republican chairman of the House Oversight Judiciary and Ways and Means Committees sent a letter to the Justice Department recommending prosecution of President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and the president's brother, James Biden. House Republicans accused the men of making false statements to Congress as part of a year-long impeachment inquiry, but have failed to uncover any evidence. Hunter Biden has blasted the inquiry as a house of cards built on lies. James Biden says the president never had any involvement in relatives' business dealings. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
And as we've mentioned, SpaceX's mega Starship rocket blasted off from Texas this morning, the fourth unmanned test flight for the spaceship that NASA and Elon Musk are counting on to get humanity to the moon and Mars. And after a lap and a half around the Earth, a splashdown in the Indian Ocean is expected. Cross our fingers. Global news, 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Do you know, Paul, that I am into the show this morning, and I've yet to look at ECO Go.
Uh-oh.
Did you know we had economic data?
I saw we had a little bit of the jobs data came out. That kind of got... it came in at 229,000 jobs, the jobless claims, Tom, and the consensus was 220,000. So,
yeah.
I don't know, it just kind of feels like it's in that same range, week in, week out.
Unit labor costs came in way under what was expected. That's an important, I'll call it secondary statistic, 4.9%. Came in at 4.0%. Productivity actually a little more sprightly than what was expected. I'm going to call that secondary data into what we see in tomorrow's jobs report. We'll go beneath the headline data at 8:30. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures pretty much treading water this morning. We'll head over to the 2-year yield at 4.74%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.31%, and that's up 3 basis points. Few companies making news. We'll start with Paramount. Their shares a little changed, but the battle over the company continues, sources say. John Paul DeJuria, he's the co-founder of Patron Tequila, Paul Mitchell Hair Care Products. They say he's now making a bid with a group of investors. And we're keeping an eye on TD Bank. Jefferies says fines against a firm that's tied to U.S. money laundering probes, well, it may total as much as $4 billion. That's double the previous estimates. Shares are up about 0.5% in Canada. And finally, to American Airlines, the flight attendants union there has rejected an offer of an immediate 17% pay raise. American shares are a little changed. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. Extraordinary news flow right now. We'll see where Christine Lagarde is. She's not moved the euro. It moved a little bit and then came back 108.79 on euro. Not open for trading yet. NASDAQ green, everything else slightly red as well. Julian Lee joins with Bloomberg News. Just wonderful in the dynamics, particularly of OPEC and the continent of Europe. OPEC and OPEC Plus, Julian Lee, how are they different in the summer of 2024?
Well, I mean, the real difference is size. I mean, OPEC Plus has bolted on about 10 countries who aren't members of OPEC but have grouped together with them to try to manage oil supply. They started off about 4 years before the pandemic. Prices were sinking. They got together and made some output cuts. That all fell apart just about the time the pandemic hit. There was this production free-for-all in March, April 2020 after Russia refused to extend output curbs. The whole thing fell apart. And then we saw this extraordinary meeting in April as the scale of the pandemic began to become apparent. They slashed almost 10 million barrels a day off supply. They've been adding that back, and now as a group, they've made a bunch more output cuts over the last 2 years, at about 6+ million barrels a day in terms of targets, significantly less than that in terms of actual reduction. And now they're starting to talk about gradually adding supply back, although I think most analysts are coming around to the view that they're not actually going to be in a position to be able to do that as they seem to be planning.
So, Julian, as we think about, and we look at, thank you very much, Ken, look at WTI crude oil, $74 a barrel here. Is this a supply story? Is this a demand story? What's really driving global crude markets today?
I mean, as always, I think it's a little bit of both. We've certainly had more supply coming on. We've had, new fields in Guyana. We've had a couple of new producers joining the ranks of the oil exporters. The most recent one is Niger in West Africa. Not a big producer, but once things are running smoothly, it should be adding another 100,000 barrels a day to global supply. That's crude going onto the water in tankers. That's just more competition for the OPEC Plus producers. Add to that, we've got some very differing views on the strength of demand. I mean, OPEC itself remains extraordinarily bullish with a demand growth forecast of over 2 million barrels a day of incremental demand this year. They are saying that demand grew by 2.3 million barrels a day in the first quarter of this year. So that's, real data that's starting to come in. The International Energy Agency, on the other hand, and indeed the US Department of Energy, has growth less than half that amount, both for the year as a whole and for the first quarter.
So, Julian, talk to us about the role of the U.S. here. We're a net exporter for the first time in a long time. How does the U.S. vis-a-vis OPEC impact the global supply and price?
Well, I think, the U.S. is both a huge consumer of oil and now a very significant exporter of oil too. So what happens there is critical. And as we look at the second half of the year, potential for growth in output from the shale sector certainly weighs on supply as far as OPEC Plus is concerned. But then on the other side, we've got the driving season really starting to get underway. And as people start traveling for holidays, that's going to boost demand for all transport fuels. So there's going to be a trade-off there. And then everybody's going to start watching the hurricane season as well for disruptions that could cause both to supply and refining.
Julian, is the EV discussion cutting into this at all? I mean, Paul's looking at the Porsche Taycan. Did you see the resale on a Porsche electric vehicles down 30%?
Amazing, yeah.
I'm guessing, folks, that don't
Miller's
quote
out
me
there
on
probably
that.
bidding out there.
But Julian Lee, where do EVs, like, you and Paul are talking oil demand, where do EVs play in? Is that like 5 years out, or is that now?
I think it depends where you are in the world. I mean, I think if you look at somewhere like China, where electric vehicles are starting to make a big impact, not necessarily cutting demand, but certainly choking off a lot of the growth in transport fuel demand in China. We're starting to see a bit of an effect in Europe. And again, it's not really cutting into underlying demand, but what it is doing is it's sort of slicing off the top of that growth, keeping things much more stable. I think the US is probably somewhat behind those other two regions in that process, and much will depend, I think, on how the rollout of EVs sort of materializes over the coming years. I mean, there are certainly constraints about how you recharge, how many vehicles you can recharge simultaneously. I mean, it's certainly a debate we have on my street in London. It's fine when 10% of the households have an EV. There's enough charging points, there's enough capacity in the electricity supply lines. But once you get up to half the households having an electric vehicle, you start to have real pressure on the ability to deliver enough electricity with the current setup. Okay,
not to a month, but can you give me to a year when that's amazing? I mean, when do we get to 50% EV?
I think we're still a ways off in Europe and certainly in North America. And what you have to consider is, you know, while the sale of EVs may be picking up, there's a huge mass of internal combustion engine vehicles that make up the vast bulk of the fleet. If I go out and buy an EV and replace the car I've got now, that's going to go into the second-hand market. Somebody else is going to buy it. It's not that sort of internal combustion engine vehicle isn't going to disappear. And as that sort of moves down the chain, the older vehicles indeed may end up getting exported somewhere else. So in some senses, yes, the EV sales are picking up, but the impact on the overall fleet, because that vehicle fleet is so big, is very, very muted at the moment.
Julian, thank you so much. Julian Lee with Bloomberg News on oil as well. Paul, I forgot to quote it, $74.
Yeah.
Remember, like 2 days ago, we were looking for 69. It's come up a little bit on West Texas.
Yep, exactly. So, I mean, we've seen some big movement there. Gasoline, daily national average gasoline prices. This is now $3.48 a barrel. It's better than $4. I don't know.
I'm standing in the street the other day, and I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 5 cars. They all got to be over $100,000 each. What's the auto insurance? I mean, I know you're seeing the same thing, but the haves out there, everybody's buying fancy cars.
It seems like, I mean, the average selling price is, north of $50,000. And I remember that electric EV Ford F-150 Matt Miller put me into a while ago. That was a sticker price of $94,000.
$94,000. I wonder what it is
for a pickup
right
truck.
now.
It was a nice pickup truck. Don't get me wrong.
I saw a Cybertruck yesterday on the road.
Did
for
you
the first
really?
Time, yes.
Wow.
I saw one.
Exciting.
Too. I don't know how it gets in a parking spot. Red and green on the screen. The VIX 12.64. We need to get the markets open. Good morning.
and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. So how will the markets react to more job numbers? We had them out today. We had initial jobless claims came in higher than expected. 229,000 unemployment applications filed last week. That comes ahead of tomorrow's U.S. jobs report and, yes, other indicators this week that have suggested that the job market, well, it's begun to soften. We are open for business. Let's get right to it. We'll start with the S&P 500. That is little change, up about 3 points at 5,357. We'll head over to the Dow, little change, up 19 points at 38,822. Then we go to the NASDAQ, up just a tick, about 0.1%, up 13 points at 17,204. Over to the bond market, we have the 2-year yield, 4.73%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.30%, and that's up 2 basis points. We'll check in with commodities. We have spot gold higher, 2,362 an ounce. We have Brent crude, $78 a barrel. WTI crude at $74 a barrel. At the open, we want to check in with NVIDIA, up about, well, there you go, up 1% right now. It's joined the $3 trillion club. That rise now fueling Gensanity in the tech world over at CEO Jensen Huang. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Paul, there's green on the screen.
Yeah.
In the opening lift here, granted, folks, we're only a minute in, but the market just lifts away from the mixed futures picture that we had.
Yeah, and I'm just, looking at, as Lisa's talked about in NVIDIA, it's just extraordinary, all-time high again today. It just seems like a daily basis here. So good for them.
The MSA, I should say, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics for Louisville, Jefferson County, Kentucky/Indiana,
right?
It's like both, is an unemployment rate that's lifting. It was 3.4%, and all of a sudden, earlier this year, it's 4.1%. It's a different perspective, Paul, out there for Ross Mayfield.
It is, and I mean, he gets his undergraduate degree from Kentucky, then his MBA from Louisville, so I have no idea what this guy does during basketball season. Ross Mayfield joins us, investment strategy analyst at Baird. Ross, what do you make of this market? Is it just, an NVIDIA-led market? Is it a big AI tech-driven market, or should we be looking for other opportunities here?
Well, I don't think you can talk about the market without talking about semis and NVIDIA, but it's not the only thing working. Utilities are working, banks and financials are working. So it's a bit more mixed than kind of the breadth thrust that we saw late last year where everything worked. But it's not just even in the semis, it's the equal weight semis are it's rising. So it's not even just the one big name. So it's a mixed market. I think it's more mid-cycle than early cycle, but it's not just one thing. And breadth is strong globally as well. I should note that.
All right. What are Baird clients doing? I mean, if they're in one of these moonshot tech stocks, what'd you say, Lisa? NVIDIA's up another 1%?
Correct.
Are they cashing out and buying a Bentley, or what are people doing that are caught up in this tech boom?
The interesting thing about our clients and wealth management in general is, as excited as people are about AI and tech, there is still just as much enthusiasm to get 5.5% out of a money market. And people love cash and the security of it. So it's kind of a barbell thing. There is some excitement for themes and things that are structural and exciting about the market. But I don't sense, for one, that it's like early 2021 where there's just this kind of euphoria and kind of just throwing money at the wall nature. But also you've got rates where they are, and people love cash in the wealth management space.
Ross, how about, I've been surprised over the last several years as I talk to more and more folks in the wealth management business that alternative investments, they're not just something people dabble in. A lot of people are making this essential part of their portfolio. So as you talk to your Baird, wealth management clients, how do you talk to them about alternatives, whether it's private equity, hedge funds, private credit, whatever?
Yeah, well, I mean, on face, we're big believers in diversification, right? So anything that's, can add diversification at a, reasonable cost and liquidity profile, which those have not been available for a long period of time for standard wealth management clients. that's becoming more available. So we talk about them through a diversification lens. I think 2022 was really impactful in the sense that a lot of people saw for the first time in a long time that your bonds and your stocks can go down at the same time. And it provides a real issue for folks who are drawing down portfolios and kind of counting on them to balance each other out. Cash is obviously now another asset class that people are using, but before it was, earning nothing. Now you're earning something. So we talk about it through a diversification lens. We have a lot of high net worth clients who like the kind of endowment model. And so I think it is a growth area in wealth management, to be sure.
So where do you frame out 10-year yield out 1 year?
If I knew that, I'd be a lot richer than I am. I think it's lower. If I could give you a direction, I think it's lower.
So it's lower. Okay, fine. Let's go with that. It's lower.
Okay.
How low does it need to move where that wall of money starts doing something if Baird clients are so comfortable in cash or this Paul Sweeney 2-year yield?
It's a good question. Barring something like the pandemic where the Fed just takes rates to zero, I don't think that a lot of that money is cash on the sidelines waiting to be invested in equities. I think that is cash that had previously been in a savings or checking, or it's earmarked for something, maybe a Bentley, as you mentioned. I don't think it's nearly as much fuel for the equity fire as folks discuss it as, the $6 trillion in money market. I think a lot of that is just people really excited to earn something on cash. So barring taking rates to zero, I think even if the 10-year went to 3%, you'd still be hard-pressed to get too much of that money off the sidelines.
All right. So, Ross, talk to us about credit here. I've noticed in the credit markets over the past few years, the best place to be, not that it's been a great place to be in general, is high yield, U.S. high yield. And I'm kind of surprised that U.S. high yield has done as well as it has, given that it seems like everybody every day is talking about this pending recession that we've never seen.
Yeah, well, that's the big thing, right? Is we haven't seen it yet. Economy's been strong, markets have been strong. So yeah, spreads in high yield and investment grade credit are still really, really tight. It depends on what you're in it for. If you're in it for return, high yield bank loans have worked. If you're in it for diversification, high yields are much more correlated to the equity market. So grab your high quality corporates or your treasuries and you can kind of hunker down. But as I mentioned earlier, it's not I think the diversifier that it once was. Those correlations are coming up. And so you have to look elsewhere to kind of spread your bets. And so again, we're seeing a lot of that activity.
Ross Mayfield, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated this morning with Baird, Louisville, Kentucky. Good voice to get outside the 3 zip codes we're focused on. Paul, I'm absolutely gaga over this spaceship. We are 13 minutes away from something I've never framed or thought about, which is put a rocket into space in Texas and land the rocket in the Indian Ocean, which is over there.
They don't split. They don't just crash into the Indian
Ocean.
Ocean.
No, they like control.
I saw the image.
We see the image, and this we're seeing like animation.
Right, exactly, from SpaceX, and they just show a rocket that's kind of just rights itself at the last moment before landing, and then some burners go off and let it land softly, which again, that's new technology, and that kind of goes to the reusability of these things, which makes it arguably a much more economic model, I guess.
You didn't get a word in there. I'm so sorry with Keith Kelly. What were your thoughts there on that?
No, it's just phenomenal.
Sort of routine.
What I loved was his enthusiasm, Tom. He's a grizzled veteran space observer. You could tell just in his voice how enthused he was to see some of these things take place during this flight.
And he said the mass of people are enthused.
Yeah.
Even though it's it's got to be a huge tension between government and private.
Yeah. But I guess one of the questions is, where does SpaceX really think they can go in the next 2-3 years? I know Elon talks about Mars at some point, and well, first of all the moon, and then Mars. But I'd love to get a sense of their timetable. Now that they're having some, I guess continued success.
The orbit that we're seeing right now, it's beautiful images of the sun. I think this is live camera we're seeing. We're not in orbit, but they said an arc. Keith said an arc out over as the Earth turns over the Indian Ocean. And then, we're 11 minutes away from, I'm going to suggest first time ever that this has been tried. It's presumed to fail.
And we're going to have some video, I guess. SpaceX will probably. I'm not sure,
I do not know if we have video. But you got to believe they're going to try because they've always tried.
Yeah. So it was a great launch and a great visual of all those engines firing at one time. So.
Did Lagarde get through the morning in one piece?
I'm not sure. I had a bond trader, Ed from Long Island, emailed me in saying, how could you break away from Lagarde? I was hanging on every word to go to the space launch, but that's a long bond trader. Yeah, so he's trading off of the European Central Bank today.
Well, okay, but you look at, can we talk about our guest that we're going to have coming up here?
Yeah, pretty solid.
He stepped on the ice with Edmonton years ago, and immediately he was a different player.
Yeah.
And I just wish there were more Mark Messiers in the NHL now.
Yeah,
I miss it.
No,
I miss it terribly.
Yeah, and you miss it here in New York. I mean, again, bringing that cup to New York, he'll forever obviously be one of the all-time great Rangers, and that's saying something given that they're original 6 franchise, and but just what he did here in New York, and above and beyond what he already achieved in Edmonton, obviously just makes him.
I mean, it's going to be too short a conversation with Mark Messier, but for all of you.
But the Stanley Cup is starting, so we got
to. And it's with his Edmonton.
Yes,
exactly. I mean, he's always been a New York Ranger, but now there was this team out in Canada
for 12 years
where they said, "Oh, who is that guy?" Yeah. And we'll talk to Mark Messier here in a moment. Michael Barr, thank you so much for your work today. Today was the most nuts news day I've ever seen.
I have to tell you, and I usually. Yes, I always get emotional with the D-Day ceremonies, but especially this one. And just the shout out, a lot of people are in the same boat I'm in. My mother, my father, and a lot of relatives were in World War II, and they served. And God bless you all.
Yep. With our news in New York City.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Today is the 80th anniversary of D-Day at Normandy during World War II. The sound of taps played as a reminder about the 9,000 soldiers buried at the American Cemetery in Normandy. President Biden was among the dignitaries at ceremonies to remember the Allied forces that stormed the beaches in the fight against Nazis. The president reflected on the impact of that day and the continued fight for freedom in Ukraine, calling on allies to come together just as they did that day.
Isolationism was not the answer 80 years ago, and is not the answer today.
Earlier, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke at the ceremony.
80 years later, we thank the young Americans who took the beaches, who helped liberate France, and who helped free this continent from Nazi tyranny.
The surviving soldiers are now in their 90s and 100s. 10 weeks after the collapse of Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge, salvage crews have successfully removed the final large steel truss segment blocking the 700-foot wide channel. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has an update from Washington.
While crews make progress clearing the channel and removing the bridge debris, Congress will need to beef up federal emergency funding by billions of dollars to help support the rebuild of Baltimore's collapsed bridge. Federal Highway Administrator Shailin Bhatt told senators at an Environment and Public Works Committee hearing the emergency relief program with that agency has about $850 million ready and faces about $4.4 billion in emergency relief requests. Bhatt says they'll have to work with Congress to fill that need, both for that bridge and the rest of the country. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
The criminal trial of President Biden's son resumes this morning in Delaware. The prosecution could rest its case today. Hunter Biden is charged with lying about his drug use when he purchased a gun in 2018. And as you all have mentioned, keeping our eye on SpaceX, hopefully a successful splashdown in the Indian Ocean in a few minutes. Wow. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thank you so much. Paul Sweeney, we get so many distractions here, but the fact is the market just won't go down. I mean, it's just all there is to it.
Yeah, exactly. So, get a little bit of a lift here across the market, up 0.1%. Not bad. We got yields also kind of steady here, 4.28% on a 10-year. So there's lots of opportunity out there for folks. And Goldman Sachs is just saying there's just so much cash out there. Where does it go? That's one of the calls.
This is Lawrence McDonald's great theory, and you're right, 5% is awfully comfortable.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, 4.99 isn't.
Yep.
And that maybe will be the catalyst. The Dow up 61 points, the VIX 1413, 12.66 on the VIX. With our new, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got green on the screen, a bit of a lift to the market. Right now we have the Dow up 0.2%, the S&P 500, NASDAQ little changed. We have the 2-year yield 4.72%. That's little changed. The yield on the 10-year 4.29%, and that's up 1 basis point. We'll take you over to commodities where we have spot gold higher at $2,364 an ounce. Brent crude $78 a barrel. WTI crude $74 a barrel. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. I've had the privilege of speaking with Gary Bettman, who runs hockey, about how bored I am with hockey. And it's good to talk to someone about back when hockey was exciting. Someone who agrees is Gary Thorne, Devils Rangers.
For the empty net, Mark Messier. Do you believe it? Do you believe it? He said we will win Game 6. He has just picked up the hat trick.
One of the great class acts of modern sports from Portland, Oregon, and a field up in Alberta, Mark Messier joins us right now. Mark, I could do a 3-hour conversation with you in honor of Guy Lafleur in his criticism of hockey, but let's set up right now the Florida Panthers against your sacrilege to those of you that are Rangers fans, Mark Messier's Edmonton Oilers. Who are you going to be rooting for, Mark?
Well, I've said all year long that I love the way the Florida Panthers play. They're probably one of my favorite teams to watch, but unfortunately, they're playing against a team that I spent a lot of years with, had a lot of success with some of the greatest players in the world there. So, and I still know so many people back in my hometown of Edmonton. So I'm gonna have to stick with Edmonton in this one.
When you look at hockey today, and it's something that Paul Sweeney and Rich Truman are much more up on than I am. To me, it's a radically different game than the controlled aggression that you played. Are you bored with the modern game?
Well, I'm not actually. In fact, we always speak about this all the time, and it's still a tough game. And you can see the teams that go on to win the Stanley Cup, the grueling 6 months in the regular season. You're basically playing 4.5 games a week for over 6 months with travel. And then you got to go through 2 months of the playoffs and eliminate 3 other teams in order to do that, or 4 teams in order to do that. So the game is tough in many ways. Of course, they've changed the rules, and in my opinion, for the betterment of the game. I think it's opened up the skill, it's opened up the speed of the game. But as you've seen in these playoffs, in order to score, you still got to get into those tough areas, and you got to be willing to stay there once you get there. And it's not comfortable to go there.
Right.
So I think in overall, the game is still an incredibly tough game. It's a dangerous game, but that's one of the things that makes it so exciting.
Hey, Mark, as a Rangers fan, thank you for delivering the cup here to Ranger fans here. And I know you won't buy a drink or a meal in this city ever again. Talk to us about the Rangers this year. I mean, a great season, some great players that I know the city rallied around, but they did not really get it done in the postseason. Is this a team that needs to be broken up, or can it be built upon?
Well, it's hard to say the team should be broken up, but I have to say, they set all kinds of franchise records this year. They had a tremendous regular season. They seem to be really a tight-knit team, which is a crucial part of winning a Stanley Cup. So they got a lot of things to be positive about. You can't throw it all down the drain because you lost to an incredibly strong Panther team. There were some areas in the game that will probably need to be addressed, and I'm sure the management will do that. But overall, of course, you can't say it's a great success if you don't win the Stanley Cup. But I think there's a lot of things that you can really be positive about this team. And the reality is that only one team is going to go away happy this year, and that's a team that wins the Stanley Cup. And the regular season is one thing, and as we've seen during the regular season and then the playoffs, it's a different game. It's a different mindset in order to be successful. And if you're a good player and you're a player that's relied on to score, the other team's job is not to allow you to do that. And so you have to be able to adapt and change your game in playoffs when teams are focusing on you individually to not allow you to get to your game that has made you successful. And the good players find a way. And you also have to remember that, even though that we have some of our players on the Rangers team, they don't have a tremendous amount of playoff experience.
Yep.
They're getting it. But, playoff experience matters when when it gets down to the nook and cranny like it did in the conference finals this year against a team that played incredibly stringent defense and put a lot of pressure on the team.
So, Mark, I mean, as you mentioned, the regular season for the Rangers was such a great one, and the fans were so fired up. And people were even making some comparisons to your 94 Rangers team. What do you think the difference is between your team and this year's Rangers, and maybe how do they make some changes?
Well, it's hard for me to talk about what changes need to be, because unless you're in the dressing room and you see the players on a day-to-day basis and you see the way they prepare and you see the way the commitment that's geared toward winning, it's hard to sit back like I am outside that box and make assessments of individual players. I can look at the ice and watch them play and say what someone did well or what someone didn't do well enough in order to make them champions. But the reality is, one of the things that I do think they were similar to us in '94 is that they played like a team. And I don't think there's a team that I ever played on. I shouldn't say that because I played on a few Stanley Cup champion teams. But one of the things they all had in common was that we were a team, personified what a team means to a T. The '94 Ranger team was incredibly disciplined. Everybody knew their roles. There was no kind of hierarchy in the team. We were in a circle. Everybody grabbed the oar, as Eddie Olczyk used to say, and started rowing together. And we were on a mission. Right. We were incredibly focused. We had a great mix of experience and right. youthfulness with Leach and Richter and Kovalev and Zubov and all the great young players. But I saw some similarities with this year's team. They played like a team. They cared for each other. You could see it on and off the ice, right. And that's an important component to any championship team.
Mark, you will always be 32, but the truth is some people retire and they check out. You did not. Tell us about the Mark Messier Foundation. Last time I talked to you, you were trying to build 3 or 5 or 12 ice rinks in northern Manhattan. Tell us about Answer the Call and what you're doing with first responders.
Yeah, I was lucky when I came to New York to get involved with some amazing people. And it was always important for us. I remember our coach, Glenn Sather, back in Edmonton, that he made every one of the teammates when we were 18 years old affiliate with a charity. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to us, and certainly me as a professional, because it gave me some perspective outside the game. And I got involved with the Alberta Lung Association, and to this day, we still try to help out. I came to New York, and one of the first things I did was join the Cancer Institute over in Hackensack, Tomorrow's Children, which was incredible. I have a skyway over there that links the Children's Pavilion and the Women's Pavilion. I put all my memorabilia in there, and it's a place for the kids and the families to go get some reprieve. And Answer the Call, as you know, is the first responders in New York City for NYPD, FDNY, and their Port Authority. And we know how impactful that charity has been to the city of New York, and what great work we do over there. And of course, my own foundation, the Mark Messier Foundation, that's really kind of geared towards creating access and opportunity for kids, underprivileged kids that would never have the opportunity to play some of the sports and get on the ice and other things. So that's been a big part of not only since I've been retired, but also when I first came to New York. So it's been a lot of years of some incredible work that's been done by a lot of amazing people.
All right, Mark, got to leave it there. Mark Messier, thank you so much. With the New York Rangers, and I should add as well, the Edmonton Oilers. What a day, Paul. What a day this has been.
Yeah,
there's no other way to put it.
Yeah, it's only 10 o'clock Eastern time, so it's been a lot happening all over the globe.
Did Alex make it back from Nashville?
She did. She's going to take a little time off today, I believe, a little under the weather, but she did come down to Nashville, and so we appreciate that. So we're going to have some guy, I think it's maybe his first day or two on the radio. He's going to help me out for the next couple hours.
Oh, very good.
But, I mean, John Tucker, you're not going to be taxed with your congestion tax. I think you single-handedly got this thing beaten back.
No.
Yes,
let's clarify this.
No.
I'm totally in favor of funding the subways because it's the greatest transit system in the world, and it needs help. Just how are you going to do it?
Coming up, an entire hour on the congestion tax with our congestion tax reporter. Breakdown. Thank you to our coverage from Bloomberg News Paris in Normandy today. Duke Ellington from Another Time and Place.